Welcome to a special edition of Normal Island. I'm Curtis Daly, and we are having a panel discussion about the latest developments from the Supreme Court ruling earlier this week. Joining me today are Cog and Sarah Delau. And then for the second half of the show, we will be going to your comments. Now, very briefly, to explain what happened earlier this week, the Supreme Court ruled that trans women are not legally women. This was based on the Equalities Act of 2010. Now, despite the court assuring trans people of the same protections, none of us believe that. And you know what? We were right to. Kishma Faulkner is the head of the EHRC. She says, woman under the Equality Act only means biological woman. The EHRC has now come out and said that they would like to enforce this, meaning that they believe people should be segregated in bathrooms based on their gender assigned at birth. Not only that, the British Transport Police have announced that trans women can now be searched by cis men officers. The EHRC have also said they will pressure the NHS to separate patients based on sex, not gender. Now, protections for trans people are in a grey area. Harassment, discrimination are all up for grabs. Trans people are scared, and rightly so. They're being pushed out of public life, told their existence is a legal loophole, all while groups like For Women Scotland gloat that they were the reasonable ones. This isn't about protecting women. It's about policing identity. Let's go to the panel and let's respond to the EHRC getting involved. Cog, I'm going to come to you first. What is your initial response to the EHRC jumping on the Supreme Court and are now pushing things such as the British Transport Police, the NHS, bathrooms, all that stuff?
Yeah, well, I'm going slightly red because Curtis had some graphics set up for me there, and I was supposed to put them on the screen.
I was wondering
and
where
I
they
didn't.
were. And
I was too busy enjoying what he was saying, and I was like, "Oh wait, hang on. There's a script I'm supposed to be following here. I'm supposed to be doing the graphics." That
it's
aside,
It's a Sunday. It's Easter. We can be a bit more relaxed and not professional.
You see how nice he is with my incompetence. It's ridiculous.
I would say I'm a nice guy, but that's actually a fucking red flag when men say that, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I promise I'm a nice guy.
But I'm just saying, we're not going to have any whistleblowers coming out of Turn Left in the near future, about transphobia or racism or bullying. But the EHRC can't say the same fucking thing, right? In February 2022, they had I think it was 3 whistleblowers come out and speak to Vice, basically saying that the transphobia at the top of the EHRC was just it was prolific, right? And you've got to remember the EHRC leaders, the current crop, were largely appointed by Boris Johnson. And it was, you had these two or three staff members come out and say that there's vitriolic hatred of LGBT people, not just trans people, LGBT people at the top of the organisation. And you've got to bear in mind, in terms of these whistleblowers, they have every incentive. If you can imagine yourself in the position of these whistleblowers, they've got every incentive to just turn a blind eye. Just every incentive to go, now my job is on the line here. I'm not going to go reach out to media organizations to in this economy. You must be kidding. And yet they felt the need to anyway. It was that serious, and it seems that they were vindicated because a little bit later, 6 more staff members came out and said that they were writing documents in their office, and then they would go back. They would click on the documents a little bit later on, and they'd find that the leadership had remotely gone into the documents and changed the documents to make, quote, transphobic and inaccurate statements. So they were editing transphobia into their documents. And one of the worst for this has got to be Baroness Faulkner. She's the chair of the EHRC, and she is awful. And when a baroness of all people acts like this, it just makes me think you're coming out telling me that trans women have privilege. You're a fucking baroness. A baronet, a medieval feudal baroness coming out and telling us that trans people are the people that are the... what is this, Joanne Rowling and her, the billionaire and the baroness coming out and telling us that, trans people are the big threat to, to people in society. I don't know. It just feels like Prince Andrew warning you about the dangers of OnlyFans addiction. It's like you what, mate? Like you've got bigger problems in your life.
Well, you know, it's good to see that he's been held to account, even though he was at the festivities today with the royal family. Literally nothing.
Oh, Prince Andrew. Sorry, I thought we were just misgendering Baroness Faulkner for a second then. I was like, I mean, I'm in favour, but like, no, apparently, like, so she was once asked in an interview with Hollywood. I made a note of it because I thought it was important. If she was a transphobe, right? And if you were a transphobe, like, what is the good answer to that? I don't know what it is, but I know it's not. I don't know what the meaning of that word is, and saying that the word is used too much. Like, this is like, if you speak to a racist, that is what they say about racism. They say like, you get accused of racism for everything these days. Like, genuinely.
I mean, you've got people doing the Nazi salute saying they throw around the term Nazi all the time whilst doing the salute. I'm like, well, I don't expect you to acknowledge that.
Yeah. It's mad. And like I mean, I could talk about NHS wards. Like, the idea of gender segregation in NHS wards, it's only been official policy since like 1998. It's actually fairly recent. And they're gender segregated, but they are gender segregated in a very loose sense. Like, you or I, Curtis, could go into a hospital right now and walk onto a woman's ward. We could just walk in there. Like, we don't need like a special badge or whatever to get in the woman's ward. And you might think, oh, but what about the privacy of the interpersonal privacy of the people in the ward? Like, what about that? And it's like, well, that's why you have the privacy curtains, because there's no reason why, if I was on a male ward, why I would feel more comfortable changing in front of a man than I would a woman. No, I don't want to change in front of anybody. I want to have my like privacy curtain. As an aside, we should really have like individual rooms when we go into hospitals nowadays. Like, we're an advanced economy. We should really have like hospitals with individual rooms now. I can see why we don't, because of like the underfunding of the NHS, like 100%, and the need to monitor multiple people with a very short-staffed NHS. But still, it's but that's an aside thing. Really, the issue is
Sarah, Sarah, I want to ask you. So, look, we were told that this now brings clarity. Because in the eyes of the average person, simply saying that your gender is based on your sex, for them, that might mean clarity. They're saying, well, finally there's common sense. A woman is a biological woman and a man is a biological man. And actually, if anything, this doesn't bring any sort of clarity. We've got the British Transport Police now allowed essentially for cis men to strip search trans women. There's already a problem there. One, it being immoral, I think. But two, how are they going to know they're trans? Here comes the transvestigation. And of course, cis women are going to be hurt. But there's also the fact that not every service will do the same policy. So if you're a trans person, you're going to be scared and uncertain to know what policy you're supposed to adhere to. The British Transport Police might have this policy, but another service might have another policy. I don't know how this is in any way clarifying to me.
Yeah,
what do you
absolutely.
think?
No, I completely agree with you. Can I just preface something really quickly? Because a lot of comments are saying this. I want everyone to go check out the Women's Debrief just quickly, because we do strive to centre trans voices in this conversation, and we're very much aware of the fact that we aren't a part of that community, but what we can do is consistently back that community, align ourselves with that community, show our allyship to that community. And I think what we all actively do at Turn Left is we listen to the voices of trans the trans community and try to echo their concerns, debunk the myths and misconceptions around the trans community, trans misogyny, and we do that actively here. So I do urge you to look through the channel and look at the Women's Debrief, where we did have an amazing speaker who was from the trans community and speak about trans misogyny and trans misogynoir. So we aren't, I
do also want to preface that there was going to be 4 of us tonight. We had the wonderful Jessica Harriet. She's a creator. Unfortunately, she fell ill, so she couldn't make tonight. So I understand, like, there's no trans people today. We are a very small volunteer-run organisation. We've reached out to trans creators. Of course, we were going to have one on tonight, but she fell ill. Of course, I would direct you to the interview I did with India Willoughby. But yeah, I get what you're saying. There's no trans people tonight, but it's not that we're ignoring them. We try our best to centre them. It's not always possible. That's just a fact.
Absolutely. So I just felt like I needed to say that really quickly because there were quite a few comments saying that, and I was just like looking idly at the comments. But in answer to your question about the this whole idea of like, oh, common sense is one, and now clarity has now come into fruition. Like, absolutely not. Like, this Supreme Court ruling is not about clarity. The EHRC's involvement is not about clarity at all. What we're seeing is a calculated act of state-backed gender policing, and it's aligning itself with the legal system, but it's also backing itself with reactionary politics. And I don't know if that is useful. This reactionary project to roll back on trans rights is something that is so detrimental to the trans community. So I don't know what clarity they're actually attempting to seek when actually things are becoming a little bit more disjointed, more dangerous, more, I think, frightening for the trans community and for anyone who is gender non-conforming or someone who is, because the intersectionality does matter in this, like when it comes to people who are queer as well. Like, all of these things do impact this clarity that they're attempting to seek, but it's not actually going to happen. And I don't think this is an accidental consequence of like legal technicalities. I think what we're seeing at the moment is that it's a political intervention, and one that fits squarely into like this authoritarian drift of the British state. And that's a really frightening position to be in when we're like in this country, to think that we are now mirroring the fascist ideals that are happening across the pond is scary to me. And I can't imagine what it's like, the lived experience of trans people at the moment within this country, and how they're feeling, the fear they're probably feeling, the feeling of being ostracized. And it's all because of the EHRC's trajectory, because they tout themselves as a rights watchdog, but I don't know what rights you're trying to back when you are marginalizing a very, very small percentage of the population. And this will embolden employers and schools and health services to deny trans people access to things that are fundamental rights, to spaces, to jobs, to services that they deserve access to. So if already we're seeing that the NHS is receiving guidance on single-sex spaces, then okay, we're now seeing that trans women are going to be denied care on female wards. Like, what are we actually achieving here apart from just ostracizing a very, very, very small minority? So yeah, I think that's a scary time to be living in.
Yeah, and if we look at the EHRC specifically, Cog pointed it out, and I think we've actually covered it on the show a while back. There was a lot of transphobia within the organisation. There were whistleblowers talking about it. On Wednesday, when we heard the Supreme Court, I was willing to say, is this biased or not? Let's look into it before I can consider the Supreme Court biased. Maybe it was a accurate reflection of the Equality Act, and the Equality Act just wasn't good enough for trans people, and therefore we need to bring in more legislation to protect trans people. Then we looked at the Supreme Court. Not a single trans person or trans organisation was heard. We heard that Lord Hodge, one of the people in the Supreme Court, has had some, shall I say, dodgy opinions on same-sex marriage, right? Seems like a social conservative. The EHRC has a problem with transphobia. Faulkner is just, their opinions are really, really bad. You then have to conclude that this is just biased. So I think you're right about the state clamping down on minority rights. That's something that we see every single time. But I do want to slightly pivot to this I saw on Twitter, which is, I'll read it out, but basically it was a screenshot of one of the protests in Edinburgh. And on this image, it says, I attended the trans protest in Edinburgh today. Before I joined the protest, I needed to use the bathroom. I ended up going to the toilets at Waverley and noticed that the security were asking people for ID. Why? What the fuck? I walked away because I'm not being asked for ID to fucking pee. And this is where we are now. And I think to the gender criticals out there, you've got what you wanted, right? This is where we are, where anyone's been asked for ID. This is not some freedom-loving liberal democracy we're in. This is an authoritarian state, and trans people are being used to push that. You've got to remember that it's not just about attacking trans people. The state will do anything they can to have a higher surveillance state, and trans people are the easy target right now. That's for both of you there.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I think that they're taking it as though it's like, oh, we're trying to be nuanced in terms of like our legal terms. Like, we're trying to be legally nuanced. And it's like, you're not being nuanced at all. Like, this is a a class and a liberation issue. This is a race issue. This is like a trans issue. It comes under every single bracket that you can think of. Like, you are trying to strip away legal protections from those who are incredibly vulnerable. And let's not even forget the fact that, you know, it's trans women and trans men. And this is why I will come back to this later, but the whole idea that this is definitely a misogynistic movement that's coming from the EHRC, and also from anyone who self-identifies as some sort of TERF, or they align themselves with like Joanne. So you are trying to make things for the vulnerable way worse. And for what? Is because they're trying to score points with the reactionary press. And it seems to be snowballing into quite in a detrimental way, and they're trying to keep the public, and I think they're trying to keep the public distracted from the real issues. Trans people, the trans community, are not the issue at all whatsoever. The biggest issues that we're coming across at the moment, and this very much is political, the economic crisis we're in, the failing services, the corruption we're seeing, the billionaire class, like all of these things are things that we should be focusing our efforts into, and yet we're not, because people are too busy trying to ID those trying to access bathrooms, too busy trying to push a narrative that trans people or the trans community are trying to inflict harm on others around them. Like all of these sensationalist, reactionary statements they're attempting to make to try and assert this ridiculous agenda, and it's not going anywhere. This is institutionalized transphobia, and it's backed by some pathetic legal framework shaped by power, not justice. This isn't justice in any way whatsoever. It is literally just power, an exertion of power used in the worst sort of way. So I think we should be unapologetic when it comes to calling that out.
You know, something I saw on TikTok earlier was somebody saying, you know who doesn't have a gender recognition certificate? Like, obviously, trans people who haven't managed to obtain one yet, which is quite a large percentage of them because they are so difficult to get. Like we're talking about, like, what, a 7-year wait? And it's not due to NHS underfunding either, because it's not like these people aren't, or the specialists that you would need aren't available. It's because so many institutional barriers are put in the way. Obviously, trans people who don't, who don't have a gender recognition certificate don't have one. But the other group that don't have one is cis women, and butch cis women in particular. And they're probably going to find, and I think this will disproportionately affect non-white cis women, that they're going to be subject to, well, have you got a gender recognition certificate?
Absolutely.
And you're going to be like, why would I have a gender recognition certificate? I was born a woman. I was like, what do you mean? And they're going to be like, well, you need to get out if you haven't got a gender recognition certificate because people in here think you're trans. And there's no way around that. What can they do from that point on? Like, sorry, we need to inspect your genitals now, in the name of keeping women safe. Like, there's no getting around that.
I mean, I think the point here is to make, despite the claims that, this is very clarifying, despite the mainstream media lapping it up, I think this has been designed to make it make the position untenable for trans people where they're forced to leave. And I do think that is probably, I can't say that's for everyone within this sort of movement within the Supreme Court, but that's clearly at the back of some people's minds, where it's like, look, if we make life so difficult for these people, they can leave. I mean, am I being too over the top? Am I being crazy? Or do you not think that is maybe the point for some of these people? That, especially, and we'll talk about intersex people in a second, but exactly for an intersex person, they also have no idea what to do. And it just feels like, well, this is a way of pushing people out, because the despite the fact there's widespread transphobia and transmisogyny, at least you could say, well, we have a vague notion of equality under the law. Now we don't really have that. I do feel like this is a way of pushing people out and making trans people flee.
Yeah, absolutely. Because people are too busy trying to focus on biological essentialism. Like, they're too busy focused on these rigid binaries, when actually biology doesn't even work like that. Because, like you'd mentioned, you said intersex people, and they don't actually, that they're not in either of those categories. So I think people need to start venturing away from biological essentialism and seeing the flaws in that, because binaries like that don't actually function as well as they think they do in an ever evolving society, but also in what society has been since millennia, like for God knows how long. It's never been this rigid binary at all. So yeah, I agree.
Let's go to our next section. Now, some of you may know we went down to London to cover the demonstration, and I can tell you, certainly tell you that turnout was incredibly high, higher than expected. People of all ages, all genders were there showing solidarity. And these are the sort of numbers you wouldn't see from gender criticals, trust me. So we're going to take a look at some of the people we spoke to at the rally yesterday.
There were so many parents here today with their children, and that for me is the biggest thing. I think if you can see parents showing their children from such a young age that everyone is important, everyone matters, trans women are women, trans rights are human rights, that is the best thing for me.
The thing about trans people is from trans people you can move to LGBT, you can move to women's rights, you can move by trans kids, you can move to Gillick competence, which is what Boris Johnson was hinting at. And so it seems that we need to get people conscious that this is not about trans rights ultimately, it's about everybody's rights.
My heart breaks for every trans woman, and not just trans women, but women that don't conform to society's standard of what a woman is. So I think it's so important that we're here today and showing solidarity with every woman.
Find a trans person, just be kind. Literally, find any organisation, give some kind words. That's all we need.
And if you could speak directly to the Supreme Court, what would you say to them?
Am I allowed to swear? Fuck you.
So most of the Labour Party abstained from voting against the Section 35 blocking of Scotland. Now just imagine what happened there. The first time Section 35 had ever been used to stop from England stopping Scotland actually enacting a law, and I thought the Scots would go incandescent. But somehow, if you choose people like trans people, maybe this is just a one-off, maybe it won't go. But the reason they do it is to set a precedent. And imagine that they would risk the union just to go after trans people. Now, who does that?
I don't think we can talk about transphobia without talking about J.K. Rowling. Now, ever since the Supreme Court, you'd think that Rowling and others, gender criticals, TERFs, would be celebrating. Well, for Rowling, she's decided to continue attacking, insulting, and doubling down on her deranged behaviour. Now, yesterday, she tweeted this, and I tell you what, it's a long one. I've heard straight men talk about trans women as though they're fallen men to whom sympathy ought to be automatically extended. But there's deeper stuff going on too. I asked a lefty straight man, I know, this is in real life, whether he was aware how many penist lesbians are involved in the push to access female spaces. The subject made him incredibly uncomfortable. He simply didn't want to hear it. I then asked him whether he knew what his straight male friends wanted from women in the bedroom, kink sex-wise. Horrified look. No, of course I bloody don't. I said to him that if you put 100 straight and bi women of our age and average sexual experience in a room together, they could write an authoritative compendium on straight male kink in an afternoon, from their own direct experience of that of women they know. I said I presumed he knew that was a cross-dressing fetish is one of the most common paraphilias in heterosexual men, and that this has been in the psychological literature since Freud. I cannot overstate how little he wanted to talk about this, let alone acknowledge that any of it was real and happening. I don't know whether it was the idea that women actually talk about what they meet in the bathroom that touched a nerve, or whether he found the whole subject ick, or didn't like the suggestion that he was naive or poorly informed. But the impression given was that I was depraved to say such things aloud, and that he'd much prefer a seemingly silence. Okay, sorry, that was such a long one. I think that could have been, you're making me really uncomfortable. Why you bring this up? And all I can say is, what the fuck? I'll start with you. we are constantly told that trans people and allies are misogynistic or groomers, creepy, whatever. Yet they maintain they're the good guys. What can you tell me about the behaviour of gender criticals, their insistence on throwing insults, and what the hell was J.K. Rowling doing?
They are cultists. Like, there's no... Like, if you've spoken to somebody who is gender critical, you know that they're cultists. But, like, can you imagine being that guy? Let's say his name's, like, Oliver or something. I have so many questions for you, Oliver. Like, what was that experience like for you? That must have been insane. Like, I can only presume that, like, his mum must have made him go to a party where J.K. Rowling was, going like, "Oh, you got to go to where Joanne is because she's got good connections. She's a billionaire. Because I can't see you ending up in that situation any other way." And I was being like, "Oh, please, Mum, don't make me go. She doesn't shut up about, like, trans people and paraphilia. Like, last time she spoke to us, it's awful." Like, but of course, then your mum insists that you have to go, and she well connected, big posh house, mansion, you know, and you're like refilling your drink or whatever, and she's like, you turn around and she just appears like a sudden itch, right? You're refilling your drink in the kitchen, like in the corner by the sink, and she just appears like a sudden itch, and you turn around, and she's like just there, and you're like, "Please don't start, please don't start, please don't start, please don't start." And you're like, "Oh, did you try the cheesecake? Like, how was it?" But like, this is Voldemort, and she's fucking cornered you, dude. And she's like, did you know that there's penis lesbians now? Penis lesbians. And you're like, I just want to go back to the party. Like, why are you here, like, swinging your wine glass around like this and talking about penis lesbians, dude? Like, I don't want to have this conversation. Yeah. Leave me the fuck alone.
She acknowledged it in the tweet, though. She was like, I can see how this would make you feel uncomfortable, but I'm going to continue doing it anyway.
Yeah, she continued doing it. And he must have been like, no, I don't want to talk about this. This makes me fucking uncomfortable, right? And then I presume she went, "Oh, okay. So, tell me about the kinks that your male friends have." Like, fucking, what? You'd call the police if she wasn't a billionaire. You would legitimately call the police.
Yeah. Sarah, this to me, jokes aside, and apart from this utterly deranged rant from J.K. Rowling,
she's ridiculous.
The core message she is probably inadvertently, I don't know, putting out there is that essentially being trans or being a trans ally is perverted, and it's to do with sexual preference and kink. That's why she went on this weird rant. Is anything but that. But obviously, I want to get your point of view. And you know.
Well, like she is weaponizing a grotesque and obviously very, very untrue caricature of trans women. Like, only I feel like she hyper focuses on trans women particularly, and that's why I always say that people who claim that they're gender critical, they are misogynistic. They are misogynists. They always forget that trans men exist. But and she's doing that. She's adopting this grotesque caricature to justify exclusion and dehumanization and fear. And the image she's painting is of some hypersexual, predatory, penis intruder that's demanding sex from lesbians. Like, make it make sense. It's not rooted in reality. This actually is very, very historical. Like, it's rooted in the same playbook that colonialists used to do to marginalize Black men and women. Whenever they used to go to Africa, they would say, "Oh, look at their long penises. Like, that is why they're barbaric, and that's why you need to avoid them." And it's that same playbook, wanting to marginalize those that are already very, very marginalized from society, perpetuate these horrible myths, and use it to criminalize a small group of people. So this bathroom predator myth, this penis lesbian myth is something that she's using to ban trans people from public spaces and to kind of like really, really jump on that fear element. It's all just fear mongering. It's all just propaganda. And the irony is that, like, her concern for lesbians is actually widely selective, because where was this energy when the Tories slashed funding for LGBTQ youth services? Like, and were you speaking about it? No, you weren't, Joanne. And then where was it when the like I don't know, like, even with, because I think people forget that, like, even people who come into this country actually are part of the LGBTQ as well. Asylum seekers coming into this country are also lesbians, are also gay. When they were being deported back to the countries where they face being ostracized for who they are, and imprisonment. So I don't know, she doesn't actually care. She doesn't talk about the fact that the LGBTQ community as a whole face really, really high amounts of homelessness, high amounts of violence, and literal criminalization of same-sex love across the globe. You don't care, Joanne, so please stop pretending that you do. And where is she? Scouring Twitter left, right, and center. She's always on X, policing other people's pronouns, being like, yeah, well, I'm just going to do it from my bloody computer or my phone or whatever, and talk about the things that I want to talk about. Because this isn't about sex, it's about control. This so-called gender critical movement has so many loopholes in it that people aren't. We need to just be loud about it, because I'm sorry, you don't care. You don't care. Stop pretending that you care.
I mean, she's already attacked asexuals.
Yeah.
I think it was Asexual Recognition Day. I don't know if that's the official term of the day, but she made time to insult them, and I'm thinking, why? This has nothing to do with anything you've been talking about before. And once again, it tells me it's another minority she can pick on. And this is the thing. I really want people to know this, that, you know, trans liberation is going to be a hard-fought war to win. We are going to win it, by the way. I don't know how long it's going to be, though. But once we do you think that's it? No, of course, the reactionaries, the conservatives, and by the way, I do think transphobia is just a conservative movement. Because if you scratch the surface of the arguments, maybe we'll get into the arguments a bit later on, but when you scratch the surface of the arguments, they end up being very conservative. Like, even like ultra rigid gender roles, what women should be doing. I mean, we've seen tweets of like gender critics saying maybe a woman should just be cooking and cleaning. Like, that's very feminist of you. So that to me is basic conservative movement. What's going to happen is they'll find another minority, and you can already start to see it with J.K. Rowling when she's going after asexuals. Cog, I want to bring you in on this one. Obviously, the discussion is about trans people, non-binary people today, not necessarily asexuals. But at the end of the day, all minorities' rights are at risk. And once they've defeated this boogeyman, they go on to the other. And I think J.K. Rowling attacking asexuals is exactly that.
I think there is a real parallel actually between, and it's not the parallel that you might think I'm going to make from that, between anti-Semitism and transphobia. Yeah, both involve a lot of conspiracy. Like, you have to believe that people who have been like historically marginalized in a really great fashion, are in control of society, and that kind of conspiratorial thinking immediately gets you into the kind of communities where theories about other minorities will start cropping up. You'll find that there's not only a crossover between hating trans people and generally hating the LGBT community, the ace community, but also between racism, misogyny, all of these things. Like, they do cross over, and like, again, it is a cult, and there's a reason that she finished that statement with, the impression was given that I was depraved. I wonder why, Joanne. I wonder why. I wonder what it could be.
Why do all these people think I'm depraved? You know what? They're all wrong. Yeah. Not me. They're wrong. Everyone's wrong. You're all weird.
I know. It's like, and I think it was Becca in the chat said a minute ago. We might bring the comment up later on, but said that a lot of these people are people who've been hurt by men. I think that's half of it. I think transphobes are broadly like, I mean, I don't want to diagnose all of them, and say what's at the core of all of their transphobia, but I think a lot of them have been hurt by cis men and want a simple sheep's and goats world to, divide the sheep and the goats. So you have a penis, you are penised, so you're bad, and you're vaginaed, so you're good. And they want to be able to split the world up like that. And it doesn't work, obviously. But I think there's another half and this is where most cis men fall into. Most cis men transphobes, let's not forget, make up the majority of transphobes. It's so easy to focus on like the loud women, but most transphobes are cis men. And they're afraid that their own identity isn't secure. So they want to divide the world into the sheep and the goats, not for the purpose of going one bad, one good, but going one not me, one me. I'm part of this community, and I know that because I can look at my chromosomes. And so the fact that I've got like more feminine features, I don't have to think about as a man. And it's about insecurity in their own identity,
I just want to say that we will be getting to your comments later on in the show. So if you feel like the things that we have missed and we haven't talked about, this is more of an open conversation show. Because again, I'm fully aware that we're all cis people here. I'm certainly not an expert. The only thing I can do is try and either do our best to platform people, or at least platform these arguments. That's the best I can do. But yes, we will be going to your comments. So if there's certain things we've missed out, please, we encourage you to put it in the chat and we can respond to it. I think we're going to go to... Actually, before we do that, there's actually a group of people we haven't talked about, and that's trans men. This entire framing has been about trans women. And actually, I think it's quite surprising that the Supreme Court wasn't... it wasn't trans people that was discussed. It was trans women. And I think if you're talking about the law, I would have thought they would have talked about both trans men and trans women. So even the Supreme Court, along with the general discussions about transphobia, is that we only talk about trans women. So I want to get both your opinions on the invisibilization of trans men.
Because it's misogyny. Like, they can't see that it's misogyny. They can't see what they're doing. They can't see that their approach is misogyny. And I ask this question every single time we're in a conversation. Unfortunately, when I'm in conversations with so-called gender criticals, I don't know what they're critical. Like, they're not critical at anything. They don't critically analyze anything. But whenever I'm in a conversation with them, I'm like, do you think misogyny only impacts those with female sex features? So ovaries, vaginas, uteruses. And they sometimes go, yeah. And I'm like, no, that's not what happens. Because I literally read an article yesterday that said that a study was done. 47% of teachers are saying that boys are openly saying, I don't like being taught by this woman and I don't like being taught by this man because he's not manly enough. So at the end of the day, when they see effeminate men, or when they see people who emulate femininity or are gender non-conforming or are queer, they immediately start to enact this misogynistic like approach to them. And that's what this is. And I think in order to understand this, you have to understand the nature of the patriarchy and its law enforcement branch. Like, even within the EHRC and even with the Supreme Court ruling, we are seeing that they are constantly focusing on trans women because it is misogyny. Patriarchy is not simply just based on the idea that men are superior to women, because that's a gross oversimplification. But what it actually is that women, trans women, gender non-conforming people, queer people are targets of violence within patriarchal societies. And we're seeing that happen day in and day out, whether that's verbal, whether that's physical, whether that's through the state, whether that's through housing, whatever, like every single aspect. And where women's appearances or women as a whole are scrutinized on whether they are feminine enough or whether they conform to that binary. So I think that they're failing to recognize that. But yeah, I do think that it's simply just misogyny. And I know that's a very, very simple answer, but I do just genuinely think that that's the case.
Yeah, Cog, what do you make of the fact that trans men aren't talked about? I mean, I think my knee-jerk reaction to it all is that it's easier to make it about sex. It's easier to make it kind of a perverted thing. And also the bathroom debate, the god-awful bathroom debate, it's easier to focus on trans women because their hypothesis, I call it a hypothesis because it's not even a fucking theory. Science nerds out there, you might like that. A hypothesis that, it's just men dress up as women so men can, sexually assault cis women. But then that argument doesn't hold the same amount of weight when it's, women assigned female birth transition to men. So I suspect it's that. I know you're going to have a far better analysis than I do. So what's your take on that?
Not necessarily. But I think that trans men, it's a bit like with gay people. It's exactly the reverse, right? It's that lesbians are infantilized, ignored, and largely pushed aside by society. And in a similar way, on the opposite side, trans men are largely pushed aside, infantilized by society. And it's not that they are not going through these struggles, but their struggles often aren't as public, and because it's harder to paint them as the boogeyman because of like the gender essentialist nature of our society, with biological essentialists. But there have been people like the transphobic nutcase Abigail Schreier wrote a book called Irreversible Damage, which there's a couple of great breakdowns of on YouTube. I believe what's his name, someone will remind me. There's a trans man. His YouTube handle is Jamie Dodger. Jamie Dodger. I can't remember his full name, but he's done a great breakdown of it. Because honestly, the amount of like privacy violations and conspiracy in that book is insane. Like I've read it, and it's like trans men are suffering a lot of transphobia. It's just done quietly in books by obscure like journalists that are like really like just cultists. And in a similar way, like the lesbian community was excluded from feminism in the 60s and 70s with the lavender feminism movement, the attempt to like remove lesbians from feminist communities, and lesbians had to like protest all that. But that all happens like relatively quietly compared to like the open and like honest persecution of gay men and trans women. And it's because at the end of the day, a lot of this comes down to biological essentialism. It comes down to what you have to divide the world into these people and these people. And it becomes about the duality, because self-definition is really difficult without appealing to like via negativa, without appealing to negation theory, the idea that I define myself by not being like other people, right? So if I'm a man, what can I do to like assert the fact that I'm a man if I'm insecure in that? Well, I can make sure that I am the opposite. I can define myself by that which I am not. So I got a woman is this, and this. If that doesn't change, I know what I am because I can define myself by the other. And it's the same shit with trans people as well. It's at the root of a lot of bigotry, like duality, I think.
Well, I mean, Sarah Cog brought up a really good point, and that's lesbians, because lesbians have also been heavily invisibilized, but not just in the transgender debate. Actually, all throughout queer history, there has been a lot of ignoring of lesbians. And ironically, especially when it comes to this, lesbians are the most pro-trans, for want of a better term. I think, I mean, I guess Cog was probably saying it in a better way than I was, but I think that, yes, when it comes to, women who transition to men, they're infantilized, they're not seen as a threat, but they're delusional women, whereas vice versa, it's seen as a threat. Which, by the way, Sarah, is obviously a nonsensical threat. It's a made-up threat because, as you know, it's cis men that are the problem, not trans people. But what's your take on that, then, that lesbians are being invisibilized kind of all throughout history? And that almost in a way ties into potentially why trans men are ignored from this debate.
Yeah, I think there's levels to it, and I think it does come down to this idea of femininity, because what we're seeing all the time is that if a woman presents herself as something that doesn't conform to what womanhood looks like, they are scrutinized, but also pushed to the side as well. They're like, well, you're not actually like a woman, or you don't really fulfill what it means to be a woman. And we've seen that policing of women's bodies, that policing of women's sexuality happen throughout history. And even in like when they bring up the sport debate, that if a woman presents herself in a somewhat masculine way, that they then denounce whether she's a woman in the first place. So it's even with the silencing of lesbians from the conversation, they still do exercise some bigotry towards them because they question whether they are woman enough. But even with lesbians, they tend to be spoken about in a way that's fetishized, and that happens with the trans community as well. But they're fetishized in ways where it's like, oh, like, yeah, well, that's a really, really cool thing to be, and like, oh, but I think I can probably turn you straight. Like, so actually, I don't really think that they're silenced that much. I think they're used as a chess pawn to assert bigotry, and I think that's what's happened throughout history, and what still continues to happen now. But I do think that from this conversation, they're definitely pushed aside. They are marginalized, and that is a concern. But you also mentioned this whole, because you made such a great point. I think it's something that always comes up, that whenever we've had these conversations, or whenever I've seen this in some debates online, it's cisgendered men that will come into the conversation, overexert themselves, and be like, yeah, well, I care about the protection of women and girls. It's like, no, you don't, because every single time you have silenced the LGBTQ plus community from the conversation, you've centered yourself and actually have failed to recognize the reason why women and girls are coming under harm, and women and girls does include the trans community as well is because of austerity, is because of cisgendered men, is because of not mandating accountability in our judiciary systems, is because we're not interrogating these systems that we exist within. So yeah, you've mentioned that point. I think it's a really good point, but I do think that the LGBTQ plus community is fetishized, and they're used as pawns, I think, for a different agenda. Never about what their rights are, never about what can we do to create safer spaces for them, but actually what can we do to highlight the fact that they are from the LGBTQ community and that they don't conform to the quote unquote norm. So yeah.
Well, that's the big irony here, is that actually a lot of the gender critical argument have tried to use lesbians as the wedge issue to say, well, lesbians are not comfortable with this. What about them? But again, lesbians are more likely to be pro-trans. There's a big contradiction there. You also mentioned austerity in there. So actually, there is a class element here.
Yes.
I think the first thing I can think of is the fact that, well, if we look at gender critical, I hate calling them movements because I don't think they are. They're well-funded groups. They'll call them groups. And if you follow the money and you follow the links, you can follow them to America, and you can follow them to Christian right-wing groups, and you'll find homophobia in there. You'll find the so-called traditional family unit. You're going to find anti-abortion policies and viewpoints. And I find that very funny. And then you add into the fact that, okay, J.K. Rowling is a billionaire. She's not a working class woman. She's a billionaire who gave £70,000 to one of the groups that was in the Supreme Court. So all these links that go across the transatlantic has money behind it. Now, the rally that we went to yesterday was quite an ad hoc rally. It was only known a couple of days ago. And look at the amount of people, tens of thousands of people. Cog, there is a class element in this somewhere. Do you think? Maybe, I mean, you're welcome to disagree.
No, I don't agree at all. I think they're all working class people. No, of course they're fucking, yeah, of course they're like, it's an astroturfed movement. It really is. If you look at, I mean, Baroness, top 3 TERFs in the country that come to mind at the moment are Baroness Faulkner, Jenny Jones, who's I want to say Jenny Jones is a lord. She's
Jenny of the Green Party as well, actually.
Yes,
because there's a bit of there's a bit of a still transphobic element within the Greens, isn't there?
Yeah. So. Rosie Duffield and J.K. Rowling are the other ones that I like instantly point to. Apart from that, it's mostly like journalists and people who like worry about like aliens, non-binary aliens gender on Twitter, like Maya Forstater, who is just, I mean, she left reality like a couple of years ago.
She's not on the planet.
A lot of these people are just like not in touch with reality anymore. Graham Linehan like wrecked his marriage for no good reason, and now he just can't shut up. He started digging himself into the hole, and now he can't dig himself out.
I mean, he's the only. The funny thing is, he's ironically the only non-famous. The only famous non-middle class person who's pushing this rhetoric, because he's lost all his money.
Yeah, that's quite.
No, he wants money.
He was on, what was it? What was that right-wing podcast? Trigonometry, and he's like, "They're going to take my car." I'm like, "Go anti-woke, go broke," I suppose. Sorry, Sarah, come in.
No, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but that's actually there's such an important element to that. Like when it comes to being a reactionary person, they know that to be reactionary gets you money. It's going to get you attention. It's going to get you clout. But like you mentioned, such a great point. This whole idea that anyone who is a TERF or anyone who identifies with being a gender critical, like they argue that. They're arguing that TERFism is the feminism. It's feminism, but it's actually just feminism of the ruling class. Because we are seeing these really, really, wealthy people push these agendas. And at its core, TERF ideology, and I hate calling them feminists because they're not feminists at all. Their ideology upholds biological essentialism, which has always been used to oppress and control, to keep women at home, to criminalize queer people, to justify medical abuse against those that are incredibly marginalized. And now it's being revived in the name of protecting women. But the politics are the same. It's border making, it's gatekeeping, it's surveillance, it's gender policing, and it's disgusting. So I don't know what kind of feminism collaborates with the police or the courts or the Home Office in a way and we collaborate with them, of course, 100%. But what kind of feminism collaborates with them as a way to say, no, we need to marginalize those who are already minoritized in society? And I don't know what kind of feminism actually cheers when women are excluded from sport or bathrooms or DV shelters based on their bodies. So I think a feminism that's safe for capital, safe for white supremacy, and safe for the state is what TERFism is. And I don't align with that whatsoever. I don't think anyone who is a real feminist should align with that.
I mean, for me, my assessment is, as with all culture war fights, it's a class issue because there's a reason why the mainstream media has jumped on transphobia for the last 6 years. There's a reason why they jump on immigration and refugees, all these culture war things and these social things, is because they want to break the working class. Because the majority of this country, right? We're told the majority of the country is conservative. The majority of the country thinks that a woman is a biological woman, whatever. The real majority is working people. That's the real majority. The minorities in this country are the elites who co-opt, and you used a very good term there, Cog, astroturfing movements such as this so-called feminist movement or transphobia. It's a class issue because ultimately these big culture wars are there to drive the wedge between the working class. Now, having said that, if you poll people, and the majority of people are, I'd say, softly pro-trans, right? If you give a general vibe, like, do you think that trans people should have equal rights? Most people say yes. Do you think that trans people are a big problem to society? Most people say no. But there are instances where you break down to certain things and say, can a trans person self-ID? Fortunately, that's not the majority. I've even seen polls where some people say, you have to use the bathroom that is assigned to you at birth. These sorts of things. Now, you might then say, well, actually, the majority of the working class is not on the side of trans liberation. But what I say is, first of all, social attitudes can and do change. All the fights we won in the past, when it comes to civil rights, for example, there was a point when the majority of the population weren't in favour of it. Does that mean we stop fighting and start arguing for it? No, we don't stop it. But also, the bigger point here is, it's not necessarily about the average person's opinion. I think that's important, of course, but it's more about political factions. So, for example, I'll bring up the protest again. There were tens of thousands of people that came out and stood in solidarity with trans people. And the gender critical protests, if you call them that, can't bring out hardly anyone. So even though, all right, you might get the majority opinion when asked on a phone call, like, people don't think about trans people, but when asked, okay, maybe they might have more of a conservative opinion, but are they motivated to go out and stand on the side of the gender criticals? No. So I do think that even though you might have an overall conservative view, this country, a conservative view of trans people and queer people, I think the real motivation is what is important. When people say, like, when you have anti-austerity movements and anti-austerity protests, and you get that person on Twitter going, well, there's 70 million people in this country and there's only 100,000 people there, so obviously most of these people disagree. Well, no, I mean, it's not about getting the majority of the country out to protest. That's never happened, ever. It's about getting a significant amount of people energized to protest. And you don't necessarily judge movements based on, oh, we got 51% of the population to do this, because you won't ever get that. But the protest was 10,000 people and the counter protest was 500 people. That's where you really see the political opinions, don't you? Because it's those who are politically engaged. It's a very sort of long-winded thing I said there, maybe a bit convoluted. Cog, do you agree with that assessment? Or
I do. I also think that there's something to be said for just standing up for what you believe in and trying to shift public opinion.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like we say this a lot on this show, but it applies here as well. Keir Starmer, it's worth saying, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have the largest majority that they have had for years. Mm-hmm. We have the largest supposedly left-wing majority in Parliament at the moment that we've had for at least the last 30 years, probably longer. And I'm sorry, they could overturn the Supreme Court ruling. It's not America. We're not in America. You don't have to let this like awkward like stand out in the law. Where we've got this like weird exception for the Equalities Act, and that's done by biological sex. You don't actually have to stand for this. They can overturn it, but they won't. Why won't they? Because ultimately they're too busy like trying to appease that. They think that like the way you win people over is just meeting them where they're at. No, you actually need to fight for something.
Exactly. And also the political parties won't speak out about it because it actually means that if they focus on the trans community and the threat that the trans community have within society, it means that they can distract from their own failures as a party or as a government. I find that crumbling public services doesn't matter. Have you looked who's coming into your bathroom? Oh, rising child poverty doesn't matter. Do you look who's running next to you and you're in the women's athletics? Like it's pathetic. Like they don't want to hold themselves accountable, so they go and attack the ones who are less than 1% in the country. So when you've got ministers like Kemi Badenoch saying what she's openly framed trans rights as a threat to British values, and the EHRC who's literally co-opted and turned into a legal battering ram against trans inclusion, then I don't see any political party really standing up for that because it's they represent cowardice, particularly in the face of a culture war. They incite culture wars, and maybe I sound like such a tinfoil hat wearer, but I genuinely do think that sometimes these political parties incite culture wars to distract from the things that actually matter. Like it's just so wild to me. Yeah. Like I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. Starmer did literally say 99.9% of women don't have a penis, so he's echoing gender critical dog whistles. So,
before we go on to our comments, I think we go to our last little section, which is obviously about intersex people. Excuse me. So, sorry, McCall. Not only are trans men excluded from the conversation, intersex people are too. Now, why is that? Well, I think this video does a great job explaining why.
I'm an intersex person. I am biologically male and biologically female, depending on which test you give me. So my body is externally female, but my chromosome XY, which is male chromosomes. I have a womb, but I don't have any ovaries. I was assigned female at birth, but later discovered to be male on a DNA level. So am I welcome in none of the spaces, or am I welcome in all of the spaces? I already know that I'm not allowed to play any professional sports pretty much anywhere in the world, because as a person with XY chromosomes, there's an assumption that I have higher levels of testosterone and therefore have a biological advantage. Not how it actually works, because not only do I not have any ovaries and therefore no estrogen, I don't have any testes and therefore I don't have any testosterone either. I'm actually at a biological disadvantage to everyone. So again, I ask, am I allowed in all the spaces or none of the spaces? Should we just go on pretending that I don't exist? I'm scary, aren't I? I'm a scary thing. I'm a scary thing to exist because, I scare you, don't I? What's interesting is that your system forced me to have gender-affirming care to fit the gender that it wanted me to be, even though that's in direct contrast with the biological sex that I am on a chromosomal level, and didn't give me a choice in that. And yet now you're telling me that the gender you affirmed me to be by force is not valid based on the biology of my sex, which is what you knew when you when you did those things. Scary, isn't it? Big bad scary conversations from the big bad scary intersex person again. My existence.
So you see from this video, this person and many other intersex people have tried to explain that this isn't just about people transitioning and then wanting to access spaces of their preferred gender, but there are people who now have no idea where they stand in society purely based on biological traits, which throws a spanner into the biological essentialism arguments. Sarah, look, we as people are simple, we like straightforward black and white narratives, man is a man and a woman is a woman, and that's it. But nature is way more complicated than that.
Yeah.
What we know about gender and biology is constantly becoming a learning curve, as with all things. So I want to get your reaction to where do intersex people fit in this? And surely, and I think this is why intersex people are invisibilized too, because it smashes the biological essentialist arguments.
You're absolutely right. Like, it's a systemic invisibility when it comes to intersex people, and like same with trans men, invisible as well. But with intersex people, systemic instability is what's happening here, because they subvert the almost the binaries that people have in their heads when it comes to the rigid binary framework of like gender. And that erasure, I don't think, is accidental. It's a feature of the system, and it's a deliberate act of state, medical, and ideological control. Intersex people are born with variations in their sex characteristics, whether that be by chromosomes, hormones, and anatomy. So they don't actually fit into those rigid binaries. But yeah, and yes, it is rare, but I think what people need to actually start realizing as well, that under the patriarchy, and I'm going to always come back to the patriarchy because it's what... Why are our throats moving really weird, Curtis? Don't know what's going on.
I don't know. it's all the chanting
all
of fuck West Street yesterday, wasn't it?
Yeah, we started it. But under patriarchy and medicine and capitalism, bodies that defy binary classifications are treated as problems to be corrected. And she, they mentioned something really, really important in that video. Infants and children particularly are subjected to non-consensual surgeries to normalize their genitals, so constantly reducing kids to their genitals. And it's something that I do speak about often, obviously in relation to FGM, but it does impact intersex people as well, because they are subjected to those non-consensual surgeries as well, reduce their genitalia so they can conform to whatever binary that they deem most appropriate. Parents tend to be pressured into secrecy and silence, and then you've got intersex people who grow up with medical trauma. And then shame, and often sometimes no access to these records. So I don't think that the system cares enough to center intersex people's voices at the forefront of this, because what they do want to keep doing is state-sanctioned mutilation and gender policing, and it's what they continue to do. And then when you relate this to the Supreme Court ruling, you see the erasure of intersex people even more so, because they are, again, declaring this under the guise of biological sex, and it reinforces that rigid binary model of gender that has no room for intersex lives. So yeah, it's concerning. I don't know when we'll get to a point where we actually recognize people legally who are intersex, that they are a protected category under the Equality Act. But yeah, that's kind of where I stand, because yeah, I'll just stop there because I'll keep going, and I don't want to keep going.
Cog, I was as I was telling you before the show, I was having a back and forth with multiple people on Twitter about this, and when I brought up intersex people, which I want to throw a wench into their argument or a spanner into the works, and I did, and they said, "Oh, don't bring up intersex," and I was like, "Well, why not?" And I feel like, what is that, because it's convenient not to talk about? So, what's your response to that then? The fact that intersex people are not brought up in the situation, they may turn around and say, well, they're two separate things. I mean, I think, as Sarah has brilliantly pointed out, it's not, and I don't think it is either.
All of my opinions are perfect if I ignore everything that doesn't fit within my worldview,
Exactly.
And it's like, just don't think about it. And it's like, if you can't divide the world into this binary, then the world can fit into these nice, neat little boxes, and I don't have to think about the transes, and therefore it's, my world is makes sense again if I just ignore everything and try to make the world fit the way I want it to. Because of course, like, binary code, right, is ones and zeros, right? What you don't get in binary code is a 0.5. You don't get a 0.5 in binary code. You don't get a 0 in binary code. It's because it's binary. It's either one or the other. The reason that sex is not binary is because we have intersex people. Now you can and transphobes do. You bring them up. You bring up like De La Chapelle syndrome, which I believe is when you have XX males, or Swyer syndrome is when you have XY females. And you bring up all of this stuff. You could they go into gametes, and you bring up, there was an obscure case in the British Journal of Surgery in 1967 where they found a man who had fathered children, but had later it was discovered that he'd actually been through as an intersex man, and he'd gone through ovulation. Like internally, he had ovaries and he'd gone through ovulation, so produced both large and small gametes. So the gametes argument just falls apart. Every argument that they put forward will just crumble. So what they do is they go, oh well, you go with what you're ordered towards, which is basically the same thing as saying, oh well, you've got a male spirit or a female spirit. Like it gets to that level where it's just like trying to avoid.
That's a logical endpoint, isn't it? Though, because when you try and push back on each step. I mean, my favorite retort is when people say, when they say, what is a woman? Because that's apparently the Conservatives' favorite talking point, and that's sort of a gotcha. Then we go, oh, well, I mean, if I say anything else but your definition of woman, I get laughed at. But I actually think a good retort is, what do you think a woman is? And then they'll say, well, it's a biological female, and then you can say, but why? And then you keep on asking why, and I think you get past the hurdles, and it does come down to the point. I mean, either it's because they're meant to be, and that then they just bring up the sort of like conservative worldview that, well, you're meant to be this particular role in society, or what you just said, it's the woman or men's spirit. I think when you bring it to the ideological endpoint, it completely breaks down logically, which is funny because the entire debate is based on the fact that we're the weird ones because we think that there's loads of different genders, and they're the common sense people who have logic on their side.
Have you ever spoken to a creationist?
I've seen a lot of creationist arguments. I've not spoken to one, thankfully.
Right. So,
I'm assuming you may have, though.
Oh, it's so similar to speaking to a creationist. A creationist goes, evolution? I didn't evolve from a monkey. What are you talking about? I did not evolve from a monkey. Do you see people walking around and do you think that they're the same as a monkey? No, God created the earth and he created it in 7 days. It's written in the book. And it's like, have that belief. That's absolutely fine. But the thing is about evolutionary theory is it does, like, the evidence is there if you want to discover it. But if you want to reduce it down to simple platitudes, like, what is a woman? Like, explaining to somebody who hasn't thought deeply about sex and gender what a woman is, like, I could tell you, I could go, a woman is a person who's assigned feminine roles and expectations by their society based on the perceived femininity, femaleness, and/or stated identity. That covers all women. And the and/or stated identity is a really important point because you get masculine. That doesn't just cover trans people. That covers masculine cis women or masculine intersex women. Like, it's like having a you can do that if you like, but a lot of the time when they're asking that question, they're not really asking because they're interested in your opinion on what a woman is. They're asking because they think that any answer you give is invalid.
Sarah, we're getting to the real heart of this, aren't we? And I mean, I don't think there's been anyone in the chat who's brought up gender critical arguments. If they have, we'll take them on. But I think we're just gonna we'll put our own.
Some have.
Some have. We'll get to them. But I like bringing up their arguments. So it's good for people watching. It's good to equip yourselves when facing these people. But the heart of the issue is sex and gender are two different things. That actually seems like quite a simple concept to me. It doesn't seem like it's a simple concept to many other people. Sex and gender are two different things. I was going to say, what sort of pushback do you get to that? And I think probably Cog's already brought that up largely. I think,
yeah. Cog has ticked all the boxes really because I mean he's articulated it so well, because it is just that needing to let go of these ridiculous binaries that people are so rigidly attached to. And I think like humans naturally do want to categorize, they want things to be in boxes, but the world doesn't actually work like that. And you'd proven that, Curtis, when you did the segment on intersex people, that like what box or category do you want those people to go in? What group do they adhere to? And Cog also rightfully pointed out after you'd asked the question about what is I need to stop using my hands all the time, about what is a woman, and they will respond, well, it's someone with, you know, these chromosomes, or it's a adult human female. Like, I don't know how many times I've had to hear that ridiculous argument. It's like, no, well, actually, misogyny is something, and I'm going to repeat this again, it's something that impacts those that don't always have fetuses, uteruses, and ovaries. That doesn't just render you a woman by having those female sex features. That if you present in a way that is somewhat effeminate, that is somewhat feminine, you will face misogyny, because that's what the patriarchy has done. So I don't know, until we get to a point where people can start venturing away from these binaries, we might actually see some sort of positive change. But until then, I think we just have to keep shouting about it. So yeah.
I mean, where's the intellectual curiosity? I mean, look, Cog, you brought up the sort of religious arguments, the creationist arguments. There was once upon a time we thought there was a god of wind, the god of water, aqua, whatever. And obviously through scientific discovery, we found out more things. You know, the god of the gaps, they call it, don't they? They blame everything on God, and God gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, by the way, I'm not here to trash religious people have faith, by the way. You know, I am an atheist, but I went through my new atheist phase, so I'm glad I've put that well behind me, right? But where is the intellectual curiosity to find out that, like, human beings and biology and science is amazing, it's complicated, we're still learning new things? Why are we so where's the humbleness to say that, you know, we know everything? No, a man is a man, a woman is a woman, that's it. Like, do you not want to explore the human body and explore science? Is it not a good thing that we could learn something new? And I think when we find out that human life is very complicated, it doesn't fit in these neat boxes, you know, like a tick boxing exercise, that seems to be very scary for some people.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Sarah.
No, I was just ad-libbing, but no, it's true. It feels scary for people because they feel like it ventures away from the norm. Like, and I think that's what people capitalize on, and it's what's been happening with anti-migrant rhetoric. It's what's been happening with, disability rights. It's happening with the disabled community, because they don't conform to what people render the norm. Right. So therefore, it's easier for bodies of people or groups of people to fearmonger and push propaganda about these minoritized communities, because it pivots away from the actual structural issues that we should be focusing on. So yeah, you've said it really well, actually. Sorry, go ahead, Cog.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, take it.
I was rereading James Fearon, who's a Professor James Fearon, who is a constructivist, talks a lot about identity as a category. If you want to look into like identity as a category, James Fearon is a really good person to look at. And one of the interesting things, I'm looking this way because I'm looking at my notes on this. I've written in my notes that, like, the idea of identity being socially constructed, it does mean both in the wider societal sense and an individual's sense of self isn't immune to outside social influence. The category that means that the categories that society has for them to identify with. So you've got two senses of it being socially constructed on the individual level. Like you mix your individual sense of self with what is in the outside world, but then that you have to find a box for yourself to fit into to a degree. Like, you have to have a category that you identify with, and that obviously creates complications because people end up believing that these social categories are like inevitable and unchanging facts about the social world, rather than like defined by like social convention and practice. And it's like the rejection of the idea that we're entirely defined by our outside world, but also the rejection of the idea that we are entirely uninfluenced by our outside world. And I think that's what people really struggle with. They struggle with the idea that we can be simultaneously, we're not like totally controlled by everything going on outside us, but we're also not just like uninfluenced by our material conditions as well, you know.
I think it's probably a good time to go to our comments. We've had a lot in the chat.
Yeah, I've started ranting philosophy shit now.
Very interesting stuff. I'm looking forward to all your comments. I am looking forward to your pushback because I want us to take on these arguments. So, yeah, let's go to our comments and see what we've got.
We can go to Emily. Oh, bless. Hi, Emily. As Emily said, let's end trans men erasure, trans women and women, and keep up the good work, guys. Also something to address when you have a trans person on the panel is trans medicalism. Yeah, absolutely, completely agree with that. But Emily,
thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate that.
By the way, Emily was with us yesterday on the protest. Like, Emily was on the front lines doing the marching. Taking photos and videos and stuff, which might end up in the in the footage and stuff.
Everyone go follow Emily as well. She's mainly on TikTok, but I think she's coming over to YouTube and trying to hand at that. So please go subscribe to her.
Yes, thank you, Emily. Really appreciate it.
Yes. Sorry. I fumbled. Okay. I might just go all the way from the beginning because actually there was a lot. We'll go to Jim first because I love Jim's comments all the time. I don't want to share space to transphobes. Does my voice matter? And it's true because I don't want to share space for transphobes. But
that's quite funny though, because this whole conversation is about we don't want to share space with people. You're right. I don't particularly want to share space with you.
Exactly. And then here. Trump started this. Here we go. Great work. No more men beating up women in boxing or smashing records. Thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'm assuming this is probably going to be about Imani Khalif, which, by the way, Imani Khalif is a cis woman. Once again, transphobia attacks cis women and cis men. I mean, I don't think that's a particularly serious comment because that's not an intellectual comment that you really want to understand. Because, by the way, saying Trump started this, Trump didn't start anything. I mean, transphobia has been around for so fucking long. Trump has rode the wave of culture wars. He's inflamed it for sure. I mean, he didn't start anything.
Yeah, certainly not. He didn't start anything. And also, like you said, it affects, and this is something I think Cog said earlier, that it impacts communities of colour, particularly women in those communities too. Caster Semenya, we saw it with Serena Williams. We've seen it with loads of sportswomen who have been considered not womanly enough, so have faced the backlash from the likes of...
And I do remember that, watching when I was younger, how... particularly black sportswomen were treated, and they were transvestigated in those days too, and it was definitely a racial element to it. But I remember as a kid thinking the treatment was so wrong. I wasn't like, yeah, that's right. I always felt sympathy for these people.
Absolutely.
In 2017, sorry, I feel like it's worth mentioning, in 2017, Sports Medicine Journal wrote an article, you can look it up. It's called Sport and Transgender People, a systematic review of the literature relating to sport participation and competitive sport policies. And it looked at every study available at the time on sports and transgender people, and found that they have no biological advantage because of the way that these policies are done. So what happens is, in a lot of sports, a lot of the more physically demanding sports, you have to have gone through at least 2 years of hormone therapy. And I challenge you, if you're a cis man, take 2 years of feminizing hormones and then try and do something that you could do at peak physical fitness, like beforehand, because you will, ultimately testosterone is a performance enhancer. You've got to take that into account. But ultimately, this isn't even about like trans men. Ultimately, what it's about is about policing women of color, cis women of color, because they inevitably end up attacking non-white women. Barbara Banda, Imani Khalif, Caster Semenya. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah, Caster Semenya. Inevitably they end up attacking these people, and they claim that they're like secretly trans because the UN's got some like conspiracy against cis women or something, or they no, it's gone. Never mind.
It's gone.
Go on. Sorry, my mind's like a sieve.
There's this myth that people can just sign up on the day and be like, well, actually no, I'm a woman now, I want to be in sports. Like, yeah, okay then. Fun fact, actually, I don't know if you've heard of it, but the Daily Wire, which is an ultra conservative right wing media network on YouTube, which thankfully I've heard it's actually having some financial issues because Go anti won't go broke. But there was a comedy film called Lady Ballers, and the premise of the film was that basically there are a bunch of guys who were, I think it was basketball players. They weren't very good, and then someone said, "Oh, why don't we just dress up as women and then go into the women's league?" And they literally, like, it's so comedically done. And when I mean comedically, not the film wasn't funny. I mean, them trying to do humor was funny because it was so bad that they literally put on wigs and then suddenly they were allowed into these sports. And the interesting story here was that this film, Lady Ballers, was supposed to be a documentary. Now, Ben Shapiro admitted on his own show that they wanted to make a documentary about men pretending to be women and going into women's sports. Like, literally, like, you know, not going through actual regulated processes of, you know, years of hormones. They were making out that you can literally just wake up one day and want to do it. He then admitted they couldn't find any examples of where this happened. And then they said, well, we can't make this documentary because we can't find a single example. So then they made a fictional comedy movie. Kind of, I think that was the best proof of it all, that there's so much myth around it all, and especially when it comes to sports. But I thought it was a really funny thing to mention because it was such a major L from Ben Shapiro that he said the quiet part out loud. He admitted, yeah, we tried to push propaganda through a fake documentary, let's be honest, that's what it would have been, and they couldn't do it.
It also, it does really affect women, like women of colour, yes. Because they get accused of cheating in sports because they don't fit like our white European like standards of what women should be. But also women who do like exceptionally well in competitions, like in Leah Thomas, the trans swimmer, in her final competition, she won one competition. She won one of the races there. I think it was the 500-yard freestyle, but somebody in chat can like fact check me on that. But there was a lady there named Katie Douglas who set 18 records at that same event. 18 like world college records set by a cis woman. But the only name that came out of that event, the only name that people ever talk about, is Leah Thomas. It works to erase like cis women's achievements as well, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely, completely agree with you. Thank you, Anti-Fascist, as well. That's a
thank you so much for the very kind super chat. Yeah. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
So just to go to this one, then Firestarter said there was no rights to begin with. If you can give birth, you're a female. If not, you are male. It's binary, 1-0, true, false. Trans people are not being pushed out at all. And actually, this is something that's pushed quite a bit, isn't it? Like.
It's almost too easy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, that's a very basic one.
So basic. But also this whole idea that in order for you to be rendered like womanly enough or female enough is if you can bear children. And it's like, how reductive is that?
I mean, I had a conversation with someone quite a few years ago, actually. And it was about gay marriage, actually. We wouldn't talk about trans people. But I was saying that, of course, you know, I'm pro-gay marriage. Why wouldn't I be? And this person was pushing back. They were saying, well, I don't think it's right. I was like, well, why? He was like, well, you know, marriage should be between a man and a woman. And I was like, but why? I love that. You know, so it's when you're like that, like 6-year-old, you go, why? But I was like, but why? He's like, well, because men and women can have families. I was like, well, why can't same-sex people have families? Like, what is it? It's like, well, because women can give birth, so obviously a man and woman, you know, can have kids. You can't do that with anyone else. I'm like, okay, so what about barren women who can't give birth? And that's when you get into it, and then it becomes a bit more complicated for them, doesn't it? And like, well, they're supposed to give birth, but they just can't. And I'm like, okay, so now what we're saying is, and this is why I think ultimately this gender critical movement is a conservative movement, because the exact same arguments against same-sex marriage are deployed on this too, which is that we can't be a woman because you can't give birth. And then you say, well, what about those who can't physically give birth, but they're assigned female at birth? Well, they potentially could. Well, then now you go into the realm of unreality, shall we say. You've left the physical world, and now you're saying what could happen. Also, what about those who can give birth but hit menopause and they can no longer give birth then? Do you suddenly stop being a woman? So you see, Firestarter, how that argument breaks down. If you base women on whether to give birth, logically it breaks down, but also it flies in the face of feminism, because what was the main message, or one of the main messages of feminism for decades? It was, I don't want to be defined by becoming a baby machine. I don't want to be defined by just, essentially being a sperm donor for the husband and making children. That's a conservative belief. I'm more than that. And you ask women, what is it to be a woman? They don't say, me being a woman is my ability to give birth. Me being a woman is about many things. And Sarah, you're a woman. You can, unless I'm wrong, you can tell me. I'm sure that being a woman is far more than your ability to give birth, or even if you didn't have the ability to give birth, but the idea that you were supposed to give birth.
Exactly that, and it even goes to those who decide that they don't want to have children as
True.
well.
You can't be a woman then, surely, if you choose not to have children.
Oh, so you're not maternal enough. Oh, you don't want kids. Oh, but why? And it's like, oh, for God's sake! Like, this is exactly what the whole, when we think about how feminism has changed over time, and the movements that we're in at the moment. Women are not supposed to be reduced simply just to their genitalia, not simply supposed to be reduced to their bodies. I mean, I'm sick and tired of these reductionist arguments. And like you said earlier, Curtis, this is such an intellectually dishonest comment that has come here, but it's something that appears so often, that they consistently reduce us simply to what our bodies can do and how they function. And if they don't function in the way that they deem appropriate, we're then rendered not womanly enough. And that in and of itself is a misogynistic and sexist take. And they don't see it. And the irony of it all is that every single time we say, stop reducing us to our genitalia, stop reducing us to our bodily functions, they call us misogynistic. And I'm so sick and tired of it. But you're absolutely right. You said it perfectly.
Interestingly, there was a Nazi marriage law passed in 1938, which basically said that your marriage is only valid if you are of the same race, you are opposite sex, obviously, and you come together in a union for the purposes of having children for the good of the German nation. And it's like, your definition of marriage can get like really, really specific depending on the society that you happen to be living in, and their understanding and framing of what is of what's like important to them, or how like socially conservative they're willing to be. But I do want to point out that there is a massive parallel between this whole like definition of marriage thing and definition of woman thing. Like if you talk to somebody about if you talk to a homophobe about the definition of marriage, they'll say, oh, you're trying to erase marriage, you're trying to destroy marriage. And like if you talk to a transphobe about like what the definition of woman is, they'll pin you with the same arguments. They'll be like, oh, you're trying to erase women, you're trying to it's an attack on my identity. I feel like we've already dealt with the there was no rights to begin with. Well, a right is just a valid claim to something. So if you're saying that there's no valid claims to anything, then what are you even saying? If you can't give birth, if you can give birth and you're female, as we've already dealt with, like infertile cis women exist. If not, you're male, it's binary. Sorry, infertile cis woman. Sorry, any woman over the age of about 50 who's been through the menopause. Sorry, you're like you're not a now woman. Men.
Yeah, it makes no sense. It's so ridiculous. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
I think Specs in the chat also mentioned once again. This is also in a way this attacks cis men too, because she said that what about infertile men? You're reducing men as well. This is what I love about this. When we talk about minority rights, the pervasive narrative is that it's only for the minority. And it's like, we need to understand here that fighting for minority rights is fighting for everyone's rights. Because ultimately, if you can attack a minority in something, you can attack someone else in anything. And if you're going to reduce women down to whether they can give birth or not, you're also reducing men down to whether they're fertile or not. And I like to think that, for me, as a man, being a man means a lot more than just whether I can have children too. So you're also attacking men in this as well. I just thought that was a really good comment in the chat, and I thought it was worth pointing out.
No, I completely agree with you. So I'm just trying to keep track. Here, Vicky. Everyone in the press is just ignoring the warning of the old outgoing head of EHRC saying that the Tories had made it political. And yeah, Vicky always makes great points actually week on week. And she's absolutely right. And then, sorry, Becca said. Also, trans men exist. Their voice also matter. Completely agree with you. And then, sorry, just to go back to Vicky. The NHS can't keep all wards single sex due to overcrowding anyway. And absolutely true. And this is why I think we try to point towards the structural issues that are actually embedded like entrenched in our society at the moment, that these are the issues that need addressing. The fact that the NHS is crumbling, our public service is crumbling because of years and years of austerity, not because of the existence of the trans community. So this whole idea that they're infringing on spaces, etc., etc., it's like, no, that's not the case at all. Like, can you guys please just wake up and notice the fact that these are the things that matter. The fact that no one can really access public services in a way that's fair and equitable because it's a crumbling service because of austerity. So yeah, I don't know, and it's even worse when you're part of when you're from a minority.
And it's basically because of their ideological framework, they're willing to put even more strain on the NHS. Which again, who does that affect? Everyone.
Exactly.
I start this comment. It just says XXXY. This is a really easy one to deal with. Obviously, there's we've already dealt with Schweier syndrome and Delos-Chapelle syndrome, which is XY females and XX males. But there's also XXY. You get like triple XY. You get XYY. You get X. No, it's Y0. I think like it's not as simple as XX and XY. That is what they teach you in like primary school to like help you understand the world rather than like trying to explain how complex biological sex is to like a 6-year-old.
Yeah, oversimplified, surface level. It's always the case, and it goes back to what we were talking about, biological essentialism. I think you start this one as well.
I just remembered what I was going to say earlier about intersex people. So there are studies which suggest that intersex people make up about 2% of the population because of how common it is for people to have conditions like PCOS, which the hormone balance can mean that you have like more male traits. Intersex people are about as common as people with red hair or Irish people. But you would never dismiss like Irish people or intersex people and say, oh, well, they don't matter, you know. I mean, if you spend any time in society, you know a ginger. Like me and Tash know a ginger. Me and Sarah know a ginger. Like we know a ginger. And you know, and they are like if you know somebody who's ginger, chances are you also know somebody who's intersex. And if you know somebody who's intersex, you know somebody who doesn't fit into this neat world of like male, female, binary, XXXY. I'm ranting. I'm sorry.
No, please do. And also, you're gonna have to rant a little bit longer because you started this one.
Oh yeah,
in the 1930s in Germany, the Nazi used first action was to burn the books belonging to the Institute of Sexology, which studied and helped trans people get under gender affirming care. Absolutely anti-intellectualism.
Quickly jumping before you, Cog, I do want to say quickly, and you might have brought it up anyway, but I was just going to say that to talk about our favourite person, J.K. Rowling, she did soft Holocaust denial.
Does she?
She said that basically the idea that there was that trans people were targeted was a fever dream. I'm completely like paraphrasing it, but basically the idea is that she doesn't believe that trans people were targeted, and that was off the back of Graham Linehan saying the same thing, which obviously in this comment proves that's not the case. Trans people were targeted by the Nazi regime.
Indeed, yeah. Magnus Hirschfeld was threatened out of the country by the Sturmabteilung, the SA, because he originally ran the Institute for Sexualwissenschaft in Germany. I can't say it in German. Institute for Sexualwissenschaft. Yeah.
The English translation would be suffice.
Yeah. Institute for Sexology in Berlin. It was originally. And wrote a book in 1910. Das dritte Sex, the third sex. Like the idea that trans people weren't known about is in the early 1900s is ridiculous. But also it's worth bearing in mind that the Nazis persecuted trans people first. The book burnings that everybody talks about that the Nazis did were the the Hitler Jugend, the Hitler Youth, saying burning the books, like it was the Hitler Youth that attacked the Institute for Sexology and burned their books. It was those books they were burning, is what I mean. Sorry, I'm a bit lost today. I don't know what's wrong with me. Go on.
No, you're doing fine. It's true, but also this them burning the books, this whole idea of anti-intellectualism, I think, is so important to talk about. So this whole the erasure of minorities, the erasure of those who are most vulnerable, the erasure of those who are marginalized is something that has continued throughout history and continues today. What we're seeing at the moment is obviously not just gender policing, but the silencing of those who come from those marginalized communities, because who is at the forefront of it is mostly cisgendered individuals, cisgendered men, cisgendered women, and they seem to be shouting from the rooftops about their thoughts and views. And I think that in and of itself is also a form of anti-intellectualism, because you are trying so hard to silence voices around you in an attempt to exert your narrative. And there's a danger that comes with that, because especially if it comes from those who are part of the billionaire class, where they have quite a bit of influence. So we'll go to this one. The enthusiasm with which the British Transport Police announced using male officers to strip search trans women makes you wonder what type of officers they have. What do you guys think?
I think that there's something to that. Institutional transphobia is also a massive thing. But if you're a cis woman, don't think this is only going to affect trans women. Because you want to bet your bottom dollar that that there will be cis men who use this as an excuse to pull aside women who they think are who they want to intimidate, assault, and say, well, I think this person is trans, so I'm gonna do the search.
They could literally use this as a way of sexual assault. That now opens the doors and saying they might be like, that's definitely a cis woman, but they'll make it an excuse saying, oh, so I think they're a transgender, so I'm going to search them, knowing fully well that they're not.
Yeah.
So that opens up more doors to sexual assault against cis women.
Exactly that. And actually, it goes back to the argument that many gender criticals use. They say that, but I can tell when someone's trans. And I'm like, no, you can't. Like, based on what? And like, when they start speaking, when they start telling you how they can tell, it's the most ridiculous thing. They're like, yeah, well, like an Adam's apple, and I'm like, no, that's you can't tell. Stop pretending. You cannot tell if someone is trans. You cannot tell if someone's cisgendered. Like, you just can't. I'm sorry. It's so heinous to think that people are now trying to classify people into these categories. Again, biological essentialism, that this is what a man is supposed to look like and this is what a woman is supposed to look like. When actually we've seen that it fails time and time again, because we've used the examples of Caster Semenya, you've used examples of Men Khalif, like they have failed time and time again because they look at them and think you're not womanly enough, so therefore you are a man. Like, no, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It does not work. And then obviously we'd mentioned this, but what about in sport? Marriage causes divorce has come back in the chat.
I mean, I feel like we've already addressed this.
We have, exactly.
Unless there's any sort of if there's another lens you can reassert this in a different way. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get us into the habit of rehashing the same arguments, but unless you think there's anything we missed earlier on.
I don't think so. I think I just re-emphasize that we aren't saying like, actually there's another lens. There is another lens, and that is talking about trans men in sports. Trans men obviously take testosterone, and so there are several examples of wrestlers and MMA fighters being forced to fight in the women's category, and they have a significant physical advantage because they're on testosterone. But yet, it's transphobic policy actually makes things worse for women's rights in almost every way when it comes to sports. But of course, like, don't oversimplify it. It's not simple on any level, and no one is saying that somebody should just be able to like say I'm a woman and go straight
no
into
one actually believes this. The only that's what like their side say that we're saying, but no one's actually said that. And I think a lot of it, and this happens across all political issues, is that the right will frame what we believe for them, because it's something they've concocted in their own brain, and secondly, they've thought, okay, this is the argument, and I've worked out how I'm going to fight against it. And then you go, well, that's not my argument anyway.
Yeah, true.
Projection.
Big projection. I'm conscious of time, so I'll try and get through these quite quickly. But Cal in the comments, hi Cal. TERF logic is essentially trans women are predatory men with deviant sexual kinks, and trans men are women who have been victimized into self-mutilation. And I actually completely agree with this. That's the narrative that they attempt to push, that anyone who's a trans woman is someone who is actually just a predatory man, and then trans men are actually just women who, victimized into thinking that they are I don't know. I think this all comes back down to the patriarchy. Actually, it's just all about the patriarchy. And again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but all of these binaries to do with men and women, and the ridiculous, grotesque caricatures that they have of trans women and trans men that they assert, that are obviously asinine and ridiculous. And then we talked about this earlier, but people were just agreeing. I think there's a huge streak of class privilege to this. And Specs, wonderful Specs, good to see you. The F in TERF stands for fascist. Yes, I would agree. Definitely not feminism. And then Noffel.
Yes, Noffel.
Good to see Noffel. Who the F goes out their way to find a feed catered to them, which shows international asexual J, just put dunk on it. World's most unemployed billionaire.
So true. By the way, again, I'm going to say Noffel was with us again. He, somebody who's on the front lines, was doing the work. And you should follow Noffel, if not on I don't know how much content Noffel puts out on YouTube, but you can find Noffel at NFXL on NFXL. Did I get that right?
I think so. NFXL. Yeah.
I'm sure he'll correct us.
At NFXL on TikTok. Honestly, brilliant creator. Well worth following. And the chats which him and Curtis were having yesterday, it's fantastic.
Yeah, really good.
Like off-camera chats. Yeah.
Very true. And then we'll go to this one as the last one. No, what's binary as a man is I'll cross the road when walking home if I'm behind a woman because I don't wish for her to feel frightened. Can those in transition not use a different toilet to do the same?
Well, sorry to jump in. I saw that as it came in, right? And the first half of that comment kind of makes our point because he says, as a man, I'm going to cross the road, right? And you've made a definition of what a man is based on nothing that has to do with biology. It was based on your behavior. And I would agree. You might say, as a man, I would do this. You're not saying, as a man, I have a penis. So I find it a little bit disconnected here. At the beginning of the comment, you're defining what it is to be a man in terms of culture and, socially accepted behavior. And then you suddenly go into the sort of biological essentialism argument.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely agree.
The standard, by the way, isn't feeling frightened. Like, that's not the standard for whether or not we separate people and keep them segregated, right? Because there are some things where, but generally with men and women, you keep them segregated because as a whole, most violent crime is done by men. That is 100% true. But trans women are very much an exception to that. Trans women are more likely to be victims of violent crime. Of course, trans women are women as well. But trans women are more likely to be victims than they are perpetrators. So putting them in the category of men doesn't really make sense. It's not about whether people feel frightened. Is their fear justified, or are they stereotyping a minority group instead of stereotyping a majority group? Because you can get away with generalizations when it's towards a majority group because the amount of violence that they are likely to suffer as a consequence of that is minuscule. When you start talking about a minority group, it immediately becomes harmful. And the type of violence that we're talking about, the legal violence that we're talking about, because bear in mind that the changes that the Supreme Court made only apply to the Equalities Act. They don't apply to the rest of UK law. So under other parts of UK law, gender recognition certificates are still valid and they still define you as a woman under law. UK law is complex and it's uncodified. But that said, that's not me going, oh, it will be all right, really. What I'm saying is that the vaguer and more self-contradictory it is, the easier it is for de facto transphobia to exist within the law because it's done on a sort of ad hoc basis. And and then people start sort of taking it upon themselves to enforce what they think is the law, and typically their opinion is just reflexively transphobic. I feel like it's an important distinction.
I want to bring up this comment. It's one of many, but Alexia has been talking about the gender recognition certificate a few times in the chat. So let's talk about this.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone who wants to go first.
So I know it's really difficult for me because I don't feel like I'm actually as well versed as I need to be when it comes to GRCs. But I think what I do know is that with this Supreme Court ruling, what does it actually mean for trans people with GRCs? And obviously on the surface, we know that GRCs are supposed to grant a trans person legal recognition of their gender identity. But that process we already know is very, very invasive. It's medicalized and it's dehumanizing. But I think this ruling guts even that limited recognition, because it does make it clear that even if you are legally changed, even if you legally changed your gender under UK law, you can still be treated for the purposes of the Equality Act as the sex you were assigned at birth. But I think it's probably a lot more intricate than that, because what you've said, Cog, as well, is that UK law is actually really, really complicated. So I know that before the ruling, like a trans woman with a GRC or a trans man with a GRC was to do with trans women. A trans woman with GRC was legally considered female, and many believe that status kind of extended to protection under the Equality Act, so that you could be covered under the provisions for women in contexts like employment, healthcare, etc. But after the ruling, obviously the Supreme Court has said that sex under the Equality Act 2010 means biological sex, not the legally acquired sex in a GRC. But am I wrong?
No, you're right, and this is the thing: is like parts of UK law are going to come into contradiction with each other, but the contradiction is going to be decided because technically, by de facto standards, Alexia is entirely right. Like a trans woman who has a GRC is not considered a female in de facto terms. In de jure terms, it is more complex, and this is where the Good Law Project's arguments start coming in.
Yeah, people will take it to the European Court of Human Rights.
They plan on taking it to the European Court of Human Rights,
Yeah.
but that bear in mind, transphobes are trying to convolute the law, because the default becomes institutional transphobia, and institutional transphobia leads to the law being interpreted in this sort of de facto way that disadvantages trans people. It's a very typical thing in fascist societies. People talk about the normative and prerogative state from Ernst Frankl. You probably heard me talk about it before. But it's basically the idea that the way that the law applied to a Jewish person in Nazi Germany is very different to the way it applied to a German, an Aryan German in Nazi Germany. And it's the same logic here. It's the same law, but it's just applied very differently.
When I was having a discussion earlier, it's not a discussion, it was a debate on Twitter, I was told that the Supreme Court ruling did clarify things. And I was trying to say, no, there's a huge contradiction here. So based on the Equality Act, the Supreme Court says that basically your gender is what you were assigned at birth through biological essentialism. And I said, well, what about the Gender Recognition Act, which says that actually, if you have a gender recognition certificate, you are now legally that gender. That's a direct contradiction, isn't it? Because if one part of the law is saying you're a woman because you were born a woman, but then you have the Gender Recognition Act say, well, actually, no, if your birth certificate has been changed and you are now legally a woman, even though you're trans, that to me is completely diametrically opposed. And this person was saying, no, it's harmonise the legal process. And I could not wrap my head around their argument. I don't know if you can help me understand here, either of you. What argument were they trying to make, or were they just saying absolute nonsense? Because I cannot... I can't conceptualise this in any other way, that essentially we now have two conflicting essence of the law at play.
Does it go back to the fact that there is actually no clarity? Like they're standing on the fact like that it's supposed to be common sense is supposed to be like so much clearer now, but actually it's not clear at all. And if we trace back all our conversations that we've had in this live today, that it actually is just so much more complex than people realize it to be, because you realize that there are lots of invisible groups of people who come into this discussion that aren't being recognized. So there's just no clarity. And I think what that interaction that you had with that individual is probably is very, very nonsensical. It doesn't quite make sense to me. I don't actually understand what they're trying to say. I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's any clarity to it, because
no, there isn't.
Because to me, right, because I actually deployed the term. Well, this is actually kind of like two-tier. This is a two-tier law. It's two-tier women, isn't it? In one essence, you're legally a woman. See, I'm trying to understand their point of view, and I can't understand it. I don't know, Cog, if you can give me any sort of light on this. Surely this is contradictory, and there's no other interpretation of it.
Cog, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. The problem is you shouldn't trust anything I say. I'm too incompetent to be doing this. The problem is that the ruling itself contains loads of things that don't make sense if you think about them even for a couple of minutes. Like it talks about legal protections in terms of maternity and giving birth, and it talks about them on the basis of like. At birth sex, which makes sense in some aspects, I guess, but in other aspects really doesn't make sense. For example, it talks about breastfeeding. Seemingly, these judges are completely unaware that trans women do breastfeed. It talks about the idea that only biological cis women breastfeed. Totally not true. Just like unambiguously false. Like endocrinologists have been helping trans women to breastfeed for quite a long time now. The other thing is that no, oh please don't go, please don't go.
Don't go.
My thoughts.
Don't go.
My thoughts have got. What was I? I've made it through. Oh wait. Oh man, this is so embarrassing when this happens. Oh yeah, the contradictions within the ruling. The other one is, of course, that you can be discriminated against as a woman, regardless of whether you have the capacity to give birth or not, in terms of your employment. Like employers are less likely to choose you because they have a bias to believe that women are going to, like, particularly women in their 20s, are going to get pregnant, and so they're going to end up taking 9 months plus off the job to have a baby. Actually, by the way, men are more likely to leave the job sooner because they move on to other positions. But still, there's that prejudice there, and it's not actually like, if I'm employing Sarah, it doesn't matter whether Sarah is capable of giving birth. It doesn't matter whether the Sarah is fertile or infertile. It doesn't matter whether Sarah is a trans woman or a cis woman. Like, that prejudice still exists. So to talk about it in terms of like birth sex is and your actual ability to give birth is nonsense.
Yeah.
It doesn't address, and this is one of the things that, you know, when people say, well, what rights have trans people lost? Well, one of them is equal pay. Because if you're a trans woman who hasn't declared they're trans at a new employer, there's a risk that person could get less pay than their male counterparts. And now it throws into ambiguity whether that person can claim discrimination in terms of wages on behalf of them being a woman. Because once again, are you going to claim on the basis that you're legally a woman, but not according to the GRC and GRA, but not a woman according to the Equalities Act? That's a legal kerfuffle where trans people could be getting less pay, and we don't have a clear law to back that up. That's one example. I do want to say, like, Alexia's comments, right? I think these are going to be the heart of the issues going forward. But actually, look, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like what you're saying here, Alexia, is that this could be a reason for hope because of the ambiguity in this Supreme Court ruling, because of the contradictions, as Cog pointed out, the Good Law Project is going to use this to take it to the European Court of Human Rights. And this is probably going to be the most likely scenario in getting this potentially overturned, because this isn't a well thought out, take biases aside for a second. Simply in a legal sense, this isn't a well thought out ruling.
No,
it's for someone who's not a lawyer, who's not exactly well versed on the legal side. I can even see that it's nonsense, and even the guys at the Good Law Project have also said it's nonsense. So, in a way, this could potentially be a positive that can be used to take to the ECHR.
Definitely, but I can also understand why the ambiguity is also something that elicits
frightens people.
fear.
Absolutely,
yeah, exactly. Like the not knowing. But I would, and I think maybe, like I would absolutely agree with you that maybe there is a sense of hope there. And even when we went to the rally yesterday and saw how many people were marching, I couldn't help but feel relatively emotional about it. I was like really choked up. I was like, oh my God, so many people have turned up. And that gave me hope as well. The fact that we are all standing alongside each other to show our solidarity and our allyship. And I think these are the things we should be focusing on as well, but also validating that fear and those concerns too. But I completely agree with you, Curtis. The ambiguity leaves room for things to happen. I just hope that the things that happen do go in a positive direction.
It all depends on the speed.
It does.
Because I think India was saying to me, she also thinks, and many people think, that this is going to be overturned through the ECHR, right? The problem isn't whether it's going to be overturned or not, it's how long it's going to take. And within that time, we've already seen how quickly things have turned for the worse. Literally, when the Supreme Court ruling came out, within one day we had the British Transport Police saying they're going to, do this, and we had the EHRC come down and express what they're going to do, and that was it within one day. If it takes 6 months to a year, we don't know what's going to happen. And of course, there's the other side of this, which is ignore the legal side. Think about the rhetoric that comes out, which is the gender criticals were right. And I think that's going to embolden certain people. And I worry that, yes, when it comes to the whole bathroom thing, there might embolden more people to start checking people and saying, well, you're not a woman, get out. And like that, like the culture with that is scary.
It's almost perverted, isn't it, to reduce people merely just their genitalia? Like
that's what it does, isn't it? That's what biological essentialism does. It absolutely does that.
Yeah. I think someone started a comment from Zach, and I think Zach.
Yeah, this is what I want to show actually.
Would a transgender board member at the NHS really be as capable of representing women's experiences as someone who's biologically female? Being a woman goes beyond just gender identity.
So, when I saw that, I remember thinking a few years ago, because look, I've certainly I've come on a journey when it comes to this topic, right? And I was never one of those people who was reactionary. I just didn't understand. I was always someone who was like, live the way you want to live, never spread any hatred, which is why those that are transphobic, I can never understand it, because even when I was ignorant, I was never transphobic, right? But one of the things I did think before I was, I listened, was that, all right, you say a man transitioned to a woman, and then goes into the workplace. Are they going to have the same experience as a cis woman who's been in the workplace? Let's say they're both 40 years old, right? And the trans woman, most of their working life has been as a man, and they transitioned. And one might say, how can you identify with that cis woman? How can you say that you've expressed misogyny, right? First of all, and I'd love for you guys to jump in, but first of all, I don't think anyone is saying that if you're someone who's most of your life has been a man and you transition, I don't think anyone's argued that they were facing misogyny before they transitioned, right? But one could also say, well, what if you're a 40, 50-year-old woman in the workplace who has seen systematic misogyny within the workplace, and you're a 18-year-old woman who goes into the workplace? Well, surely in a way the same logic applies, because the older woman's going to have decades on that younger woman of experience of misogyny.
But I'm going to push back on that ever so slightly, only because and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, but if we, let's go back to the patriarchy. Like the patriarchal theoretical framework. Sorry, I'm like tripping over my words. Theoretical framework is rooted in 3 beliefs, like that male and female are a natural, immutable, and exhaustive binary. The second is that all males should be masculine, all females should be feminine, and that masculinity is almost incompatible with and superior to femininity. So when we break down those 3 theoretical beliefs, we're actually saying, well, the first belief about them being immutable is that every person, by virtue of their reproductive ability, usually their genitalia, is decisively male or female, and that can never be changed. The second, the whole idea that they are masculine, men are masculine, females are feminine, women are feminine, is actually making sure that society can comply with these rigid and strict rules about what women and men should be doing when it comes down to sexual attractions, clothing, etc., etc. And this whole idea of masculinity being incompatible, superior to femininity being the third belief, that it maintains that anything feminine is anti-masculine and vice versa. And where I'm going with this is essentially that when you lay those beliefs out and you look at them up close and personal, what you're seeing is that that's where TERFs go wrong, because they fail to recognize that misogyny imposes all 3 beliefs on any group that defies or challenges them. And trans women do present that challenge to society as a whole, or for people who are gender critical or are TERFs, just trans communities as a whole present that challenge, because they don't exist within that framework, that awful framework that's now formed the fabrics of our society that people are so ingrained in, means that they think the only people that can face misogyny are those that have female sex features or present themselves as feminine, when actually it does impact those who are gender non-conforming, it does impact those who are queer, and it does impact those the men who actually do present as somewhat effeminate as well. So yeah, I think it kind of it reveals the reach of misogyny.
I just also want to be clear, because for those who question in chat, I don't mean that like I was saying that if you transition at a later age, that therefore you were a man. I mean,
oh no, yeah.
I know you were always a woman, right? But I meant like socially, like if you become more female presenting, how other people treat you. I don't mean that, oh no, like you suddenly decided you're a woman. That's not the argument I'm making. I'm just saying that obviously society, the way society looks at you, if you're presenting as a male, and then in a few short years you then transition and you're presenting as a female, the way other people treat you, that's the sort of angle I was trying to get. Not that I felt like, oh no, you were always a man and suddenly we transition as a woman. I would tend to believe that if you transition at a later date, even when you're a bit older, you're probably you were always transgender. I just wanted to just clarify that.
Yeah. No,
what use is your definition of sexism if it doesn't fundamentally root itself in biological essentialism and trying to break away from biological essentialism? Like the definition of misogyny, the good definition of misogyny, is the attribution of negative social characteristics to women based on their biology, like based on biological essentialism, and the need to adjust society around those characteristics, which is what trans women like specialize in avoiding. Like they are painfully aware of this. In the Authority Gap by Mary Sieghart. I want to say it's Mary Sieghart. I've forgotten. Yeah, it's Mary Sieghart. Chapter 2 is dedicated to the experiences of 2 Stanford University professors, Ben Bars and Joan Roughgarden, and the way that Ben Bars, when he transitioned to become a trans man, ended up being treated much better, and Joan Roughgarden experienced that she was treated much worse by people who both knew and didn't know that she was a trans woman, and the trans men see a big improvement in how they're treated, and the only variable that changes is their gender, showing that there's a lot of misogyny involved in the prejudice against trans women. So if you put trans women on a board, they're probably more likely to understand than you would think.
Yeah. Well, there's the empathy, but also, look, I mean, to try and get back to the point he's making about being a board member, right? First of all, board member is multiple people. You're going to have cis women on there as well. But it will be good to have representation of trans people.
Yeah.
So let's say that you've got cis women on there, and then, okay, you can represent cis women. You can have a trans woman on there who completely empathizes with misogyny, but also it'd be good to have someone representing trans people too. Like, this is where it's good to have collective effort and multiple people involved to represent other people's experiences. It's not just one board member. So I do find your comment a little bit confusing because it's multiple people, isn't it? With multiple different backgrounds. It's like saying have white people on there, have people of color on there, disabled people on there. It's just about having more representation.
Exactly that.
Ultimately.
Exactly that. Sean Wallace's. This is an interesting one. I'm glad someone started this.
I wanted to touch on this because I've lost family members to anorexia, and I always find it an interesting thing for people to bring up anorexia nervosa. So first of all, trans people are not deluded about the body that they have, whereas people with anorexia literally perceive themselves as being fatter than they are. It's literally dysmorphia. It's literally body dysmorphia is the term I'm looking for. And anorexia is not treated through affirmation because the clinical treatment for anorexia as a dysmorphia is not the same as the clinical treatment for a dysphoria.
Yeah.
A dysphoria is a mismatch between two aspects of your health and well-being. So in the case of gender dysphoria, we're talking about a mismatch between your physical body and your identity. And it's really important to emphasize that trans people are not they're not under delusions about the body that they have. They wouldn't spend tens of thousands, thousands to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands on surgeries and hormone replacement therapies if they thought that they were already in the body of a woman, right? It's not a dysmorphia. It is a dysphoria. And we treat those two categories very differently. The other thing that comes up often in relation to anorexia nervosa is social contagion theory. The idea that, it catches and goes through young women and men like a social contagion. But the primary theorist who came up with the way that anorexia nervosa spread is René Girard and his theory of mimetic rivalry. But mimetic rivalry is a theory that only works on socially homogenous ideas and ideas that are not socially homogenous. What do I mean? Socially what's the term? You say that the US is I'm trying to think of the term. It's the term for when you're like on top of a hierarchy. I can't think of the term. But basically the what's pushed in the mainstream media, right? It only works for what is pushed in the mainstream media as the norm. So being thin and being thinness being attractive is what's pushed in the mainstream media as the norm, and therefore it can spread through mimetic rivalry as a social contagion.
Like, the external factors can influence anorexia, but external factors do not influence being trans. Which is like the idea of like, sorry,
cis normativity is the norm, right?
Yeah,
that's the big difference. Whereas like
which is why it's a load of rubbish when you say exposing children to trans people makes them trans. It doesn't do the way that they said it about gay people. They said, well, don't expose people to gay people because they're turned gay. Remember the whole SpongeBob thing? We don't want our kids watching SpongeBob just in case it might be gay. But ultimately, in a really simple way of putting this, if you have gender dysphoria, right, the treatment is to affirm the gender that you want to be, whether that's through socially transitioning all the way up to surgery, and that helps people. When trans people get to express their true identity, they are happier. But when you say to an anorexic, just make yourself even skinnier, that makes them sicker. You've done the very intellectual argument, but I want to do the very basic argument, which is that there are two different things. Encouraging anorexics to be skinnier is obviously immoral, but it will make them sicker. It won't fix them. But for a lot of people, respecting people's gender, the identity that they feel, to allow them to express it, and if they want to do it medically, that literally saves people's lives.
Literally.
That is why there is a discussion, because obviously the whole nother debate about trans kids. For some trans kids, it's either let them socially or medically transition, or they commit suicide, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So these are two very different things, because I saw this exact same point on Twitter. And it is an ignorant thing to say, because your basis of, well, you are delusional if you're trans, which is utter nonsense. And I think Cog laid out perfectly why that's not the case.
I've got that language now. It's the hegemonic idea. Mimetic rivalry only worked with the hegemonic idea, which is cis-normativity, and in the inverse for anorexia, thinness. Right?
Yes, exactly.
It doesn't work the other way around.
Which is why when we look at anorexia, we look at the way we look at like sort of culture institutions. We look at the way the media pushes us what an ideal body is. We've been quite successful over the years. I mean, look at like women's magazines. Magazines can be so harmful because it gives a false idea of what it is to be attractive. And even in the 90s, the sort of model human was either a really gym buff guy or extremely skinny woman. And now we're getting better at it. People are celebrating their bodies in different ways. And also culturally, like you could, I mean, that's what they do. Like, what's the typical average someone finds is attractive in different countries? You get different results because it's all culturally, and they can be harmful. That's again not the same for trans people. There's nothing you can do externally that will change people's minds. If people want to transition, they're going to want to transition, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. And actually, I was putting in the comments, like, can someone time out Zach? Because I just saw a comment that I really did not like.
Right. Okay.
And so I'm sorry, Alexa, that you had to read that if you did. But I think like what it all comes down to is that it is a basic human right to be able to access healthcare in a way that's fair and safe and equitable. And what you're doing is you're creating an even bigger divide by saying, well, no, you are not what you say you are, so therefore we're going to make sure that you are that you're put into this category that we have decided for you. Like, no, you know what, like, fuck you. Like, no, absolutely not. Like, from Natalie's book yesterday, like, fuck you, because I'm sick and tired of people creating these ridiculous, divisive, reactionary, sensationalist like talking points and thinking that they're standing for women and girls. You do not stand for us. You do not stand for women and girls. And I say us because us, as in me as a cisgendered woman, transgendered women, trans men, like people who are on the margins, people who are vulnerable, people who are minoritized, you do not stand for us. Because if you actually cared about the violence being enacted on women and girls, then you would be fighting for the fighting for the violence that happens to all women, not just the women that you deem or render to be women. Because would you hold the same energy for women who didn't, cisgendered women who didn't present as womanly enough? And you clearly don't hold the same energy for those who are trans women. So you know what? We don't want your help. We just want you to get the fuck out our business and allow us to actually protect the people that deserve protecting. I think everyone deserves protecting, obviously, but I think we can all strive to create safer spaces, and that's what I'm rooting for.
I mean, like, I don't mind if people have questions and want to actually debate. A lot of people, though, do not want to do that. A lot of people are just putting some really harmful comments, and I think, like, Zach, who's now been timed out, okay, some of your questions were like, let's get into it, let's discuss it, but then so many people always got to push it further and further and further, and it gets to the point that, well, we know what you're doing then. Are you actually intellectually curious about this all? Are you genuinely asking questions? And a lot of times they're not. So look, we've been more than fair, I'd say, that we will take your questions if there's things you're not sure about, or if you want to push back on us, we'll engage. But if the point that you start making, a lot of our viewers who are queer, by the way, you start making them feel uncomfortable and pretty hostile, you're going to be timed out.
Can I quickly add in about there's, as part of this comment said about autistic people. Autistic people are often in this whole discussion framed as infantilized and framed as people who don't understand what they're doing, and prejudiced against autistic people. It is true that trans people are disproportionately autistic people, but that is because the way that an autistic person's brain works typically falls outside of like normal social like categories. Like that is typically the way it works. So they're more likely to have a view of gender where they're like, well, that just doesn't add up to me. Like it just doesn't. I don't see the social norms that you see in the same way. It's not that one's right and one's wrong. I just see it differently. And so often it's framed as, you know, the cart's put before the horse. Oh, you're autistic, so you just don't understand, and therefore, you know, you don't understand, so you can be easily tricked into thinking you're transgender. No, it's that they are autistic, so they see the world a different way, and they feel like that doesn't express who they are, so they want to be that, you know, that they want to live life as a man or a woman or non-binary person, you know.
Yeah.
Feel is important to emphasize. Sorry, I feel like we have gone on for quite a while.
Well, I think it's been nearly 2.5 hours, which is our longest ever show. Yes. I think it's been a long time.
We're just breaking records.
You know, I think, look, I will say we're not going to be back tomorrow because I think it is technically bank holiday still. So we'll be back on Wednesday. From Wednesday, obviously, it's going to be normal schedule. There's going to be multiple different stories we're going to talk about. So, unfortunately, like, stories get not pushed by the wayside, but, like, we have to put attention on the economy and foreign policies. So, knowing that, I'm glad that we've at least put a space for today, which is our longest ever show, to specifically talk about this. Because, I mean, I'm being honest, it doesn't mean we can't do a 2.5 hour show about one issue every single time.
Yeah.
And therefore, I feel like it was important that we have a special show today to dedicate to this because, given what's happened recently, because I think when it comes to this issue, there's a level of fear amongst many people, not just trans people, by the way, but particularly trans people. A lot of our audience are queer. I think this is a signal to say that we want to take this really, really seriously. But also, again, yeah, like when it comes Wednesday, it's going to be back to the old format of talking about multiple issues. And I can't guarantee that we're going to talk about this issue every single show. So, yeah, I thought it was important that we I mean, not just me, we all thought it was important because we all decided to do it today. I don't know if there's any other comments you want to highlight or talk about. I'm not trying to egg you on to stay on the show for longer, but I just wonder if there is anything you did miss out, because there's been a lot of comments. It's been a quite a big show. We've had a lot of people tune in.
Sorry, I actually got rid of Callum's comment.
Don't worry. Cal was just saying that we've got later in the week we've got our coverage of yesterday's march coming out.
Yes. So if you've just joined us and you didn't see us at the start of the show, we went down to the rally to report on the massive demonstration, a lot bigger than we expected. I mean, if you had to estimate how many people were there, what would you say? It was tens of thousands, surely.
Definitely thousands. Yeah, there was like a lot, more than I was anticipating, and I think that's why a lot of us did get quite emotional at the turnout.
Because there was only, and I note as well, there was only one British mainstream media outlet there. That was Sky News.
Yes.
The only other two mainstream media outlets were not British. There was CNN Portugal and AFP, which is French, right? So no curiosity for the mainstream media. However, of course, the mainstream media picked up on the negative aspects. There was someone who vandalized. Whose statue was vandalized? Actually, I can't remember who it was. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, when it comes to these rallies, the mainstream media are only going to talk about it if they could do it in a negative light. So, of course, they didn't actually go to the rally. They didn't speak to people there. But as soon as someone... Look, every protest, there's a silly person who does something very, very silly, right? And they'll try and use that to say, well, this is the entire movement. It's not. We went down there and we actually spoke to people there. And Callum is going to put together a brilliant package. And Cog also did some behind-the-scenes stuff. So there's going to be... Even though, you know... I mean, maybe there's more development on this story and we do cover it on Wednesday, but if not, if there isn't any more live shows about this topic, there's going to be more content about the rally throughout the week. We've got a lot of stuff that we filmed, so especially on social media, we'll be putting out clips too.
Yeah.
People on the chat are saying it was Millicent Fawcett whose statue was defaced. But I do often think in these scenarios, unless you can show me who that is, I don't really care. They don't represent the other people on the march. I'm certainly not going to dismiss 99,999 people because one person defaced a statue. Like, talk about a real issue. Give me a reason why I should take that seriously.
Literally, but it's what happened with the. I don't want to say that to relate to a different protest, but when the Edward Colston statue got thrown into in Bristol, and it was like people who were against the Black Lives Matter protests were like, "But look what they did to Edward Colston! No, not Edward Colston."
To be fair, I thought that was brilliant, and the reason
so did I.
The reason why I thought that was brilliant was because there were groups that were trying to organise with the council to get it taken down. They were going through the proper channels, and they kept delaying it. And they said, well, if you're going to leave us no choice, he's going in the fucking river.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a great bit of solidarity from Bristol. My hometown, by the way, of Bristol. I was so proud.
It's a really great city.
It's not like that was their first thing they did, although it would have been funny anyway. They went through the proper channels, and they were... there was pushback every step of the way. There's also this: do Turn Left allow story or news recommendations? We do. Our email's not on the screen, but if you either DM us on social media, so Twitter, Blue Sky, TikTok, Instagram, or you can email us, which is contact@turnleftmedia.co.uk. If there's anything we've missed, drop us an email. It's been done before. There's a couple of stories what we might have missed because look, we are all voluntaries here. We don't always get to see everything, and you feel like we should cover it. Then just say, look, there's this great story, and give us a link, and we'll do our best to try and cover it.
Agreed. But I think we should probably end just by saying that we stand with the trans community through and through, just solidarity all the way. And I think if you do, because it is a privilege to be able to go to a march or a rally if you're able to do so. And for those that did come out, incredibly brave of you. And for those that wish they could but couldn't, I feel like the energy was felt. And I think what we can just do is continue to be loud about our solidarity, listen to trans voices, more than anything, because they're at the forefront of all of this. So I think that's what, that will be my final comment with everything.
Anything? Do you sign off there, Cog, at all?
Yeah, no, I'd echo that and say, keep an eye on the trans people around you. Often it can be as simple as just making sure that you're meeting up with them regularly, checking in, seeing how they're doing, and be conscious of whether or not they want their identity known. Go out of your way to play whatever game that they need to do in order to survive with them, their family, their work, whatever it is. If you know a trans person, respect their decision to either be out or not be out, and try and look after them in whatever way you can.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I mean it's very privileged of us who aren't trans to, we can leave this space whenever we want, and I acknowledge that. It's also, and I say this a lot, you don't want to sort of sugarcoat the situation because you'd be lying, but also you feel bad when you bring the bad news. The only thing we can do, because the mainstream media, of course, won't do it, they're not interested, is to hold spaces like these. Whether it's platforming trans people, or even if we don't get around to it, sometimes it's not possible. It's to say that actually, regardless of how many arseholes you meet in your life, regardless of the hordes of TERFs on Twitter who want to ratio you, regardless of what the law says, there are people who do stand in solidarity with you. And I mean, Cog, you're right, it's best to be proactive and to let it be known that you stand with them, but also to think that quietly we all are standing with you too. We're thinking about you when we can. And I think that, hopefully our coverage of trans issues and queer issues is good enough, and we're always learning and stuff. But I guess what we can do, the best we can do as an independent media outlet, is to try our hardest to understand and platform people and arguments. It's not going to be easy, absolutely not. But I'm really proud of our community so far. We're a small community, but we're growing. This time next year we get 1 million subscribers. That was a joke. I know, Sarah, you are
I believe
you are
it.
optimistic as hell, but I love our community. I love the people in the chat. And yeah, there's a lot of queer people watching, and there's also a lot of straight people who are just good people and allies too, who are watching, and cis people too. So all of us together, I think we're doing a great job. And yeah, we can only get bigger.
True.
Together, that is. We get bigger together.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. That is all we have time for. But I want to thank the panel tonight. I really appreciate your insights. It's been fantastic. You guys are amazing. We will be back on Wednesday, because I did say that, yeah, we are taking a day off tomorrow. I mean, I don't think I'm going to take a fully day off, though. I think we'll probably do some editing for some clips from the rally. But yeah, we will be back on Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Thank you so much for being part of this show. It's been a long one. It's been 2.5 hours. It's 10 o'clock at night. You've been brilliant. And I will see you next time.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.